Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. Leah Toby Roberts was born on July 23, 1976, in Durham, North Carolina, a city known for its universities and research centers, nestled in the gently rolling Piedmont region of the state. Durham in the 1970s and 80s was transforming from its industrial roots into an educational and medical hub, providing a dynamic backdrop for Leah's childhood. The Roberts family home sat in a leafy neighborhood where children played freely on tree-lined streets. Here, Leah grew up as the youngest of 3 children, with an older brother Heath and sister Kara. By all accounts, the Roberts household was one filled with love, intellectual curiosity, and strong family bonds. Family photos from this time show a smiling, bright-eyed girl with a mischievous grin and untamed blonde hair, often captured mid-laugh or in the middle of some creative pursuit. Friends and family described young Leah as possessing a natural brightness, not just intellectual, though she certainly was smart, but a kind of inner luminosity that drew others to her. She was the sort of child who collected interesting rocks and leaves, who asked questions about the stars, who made up elaborate stories for her dolls and stuffed animals. Her elementary school teachers noted her vivid imagination and her ability to lose herself completely in books. As she grew into adolescence, Leah developed a reputation for kindness and inclusivity. She wasn't part of any particular clique in high school but moved easily between different social groups. She played soccer for a few years, joined the school newspaper, and participated in community theater productions, showing an early interest in exploring different facets of herself rather than settling into one defined role. Her mother, Mary, worked as a nurse and instilled in Leah a deep sense of compassion and service to others. Her father, Walter, was an engineer with a quiet, thoughtful demeanor who encouraged his children's educational pursuits. Weekends often found the family hiking in the nearby Eno River State Park or taking day trips to the Blue Ridge Mountains, fostering in Leah a love of nature and open spaces that would later influence her fateful journey. By the time Leah graduated from high school in 1994, she had developed into a thoughtful young woman with diverse interests and a gentle confidence. She enrolled at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, just a short drive from her childhood home. Initially, she pursued pre-veterinary studies, her love of animals pointing her toward what seemed like a natural career path. But college proved to be a time of both intellectual awakening and profound personal tragedy for Leah. She discovered new subjects that fascinated her, eventually switching her major to Spanish and anthropology, fields that spoke to her growing interest in different cultures and ways of living. Friends from this period recall Leah as someone who was constantly evolving, eager to discuss philosophy and literature late into the night, someone who questioned conventional paths and societal expectations. Then, in 1998, during her junior year of college, Leah's world was upended when her mother Mary was diagnosed with heart disease. The illness progressed rapidly, and within months, Mary Roberts passed away. The loss devastated the close-knit Roberts family, but especially Leah, who had shared a particularly close bond with her mother. As if this tragedy weren't enough, just a year later, in 1999, Walter Roberts was diagnosed with cancer. Leah temporarily withdrew from her studies to help care for her father, spending long hours at his bedside, reading to him from favorite books and sharing memories of happier times. By late 1999, Walter too had passed away, leaving Leah and her siblings orphaned in the space of just 18 months. These successive losses created a profound shift in Leah's perspective on life. Friends noticed a new urgency in her approach to living, a desire to experience things deeply and authentically rather than simply following prescribed paths. She began journaling extensively, filling notebooks with reflections on mortality, meaning, and purpose. In these pages, which would later provide investigators with crucial insights into her mindset, Leah questioned whether following a traditional career track was what she truly wanted. It was during this period of grief and reflection that Leah discovered the works of Jack Kerouac, particularly his seminal novel, On the Road. The book, with its themes of restless wandering, rejection of conventional society, and search for transcendent experience, resonated deeply with Leah in her vulnerable state. She began highlighting passages and writing notes in the margins of her copy, notes that revealed her growing desire to embark on her own journey of discovery. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through motions," she wrote to a friend in early 2000. "Everyone's mapping out careers and marriages, but after mom and dad, I keep thinking, what if there isn't time for all that? What if life needs to be lived now, not someday?" In January 2000, another pivotal event occurred. Leah was involved in a serious car accident on a rainy evening just outside Raleigh. Though she escaped without life-threatening injuries, the experience of being trapped in her crumpled vehicle until emergency services arrived left her shaken and even more aware of life's fragility. During her recovery in the hospital, friends brought her books, including more Kerouac and other Beat Generation writers, which she devoured from her hospital bed. Upon her release, Leah made a decision that surprised those close to her. She withdrew from her classes at NC State, despite being just credits away from graduation. She accessed approximately $5,000 of the inheritance money left to her by her parents and began quietly planning what she would later describe in a letter to her sister as, "not running away from something, but running towards something, I'm not sure what yet." In the weeks that followed, Leah spent time researching travel routes across the United States. Her internet search history, later examined by investigators, showed particular interest in the Pacific Northwest, especially sites mentioned in Kerouac's works. She purchased camping equipment, a road atlas, and journals. She had her Jeep Cherokee serviced to ensure it was ready for a long journey. These preparations were methodical but kept mostly private. Only her closest friends had any inkling of what she was planning. The morning of March 9, 2000, dawned cool and misty in Durham. It was the kind of early spring day where winter still clung to the edges of things while hints of renewal pushed through, perhaps a fitting metaphor for Leah's own state of mind as she prepared to leave behind the familiar and venture into the unknown. That morning unfolded like many others in the small rental house Leah shared with a roommate near the NC State campus. She fed her cat, Bee, carefully measuring out the prescription food the animal needed for a kidney condition. She watered her houseplants and tidied her room. She made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, making final notations in her journal. To any observer, it would have appeared to be a perfectly ordinary Thursday. Her roommate, Jennifer, left for classes around 9 a.m., exchanging casual goodbyes with Leah, having no idea that this would be their final interaction. She seemed peaceful, Jennifer would later tell investigators. Maybe a little introspective, but nothing that suggested she was about to disappear. Sometime after Jennifer's departure, Leah packed her white 1993 Jeep Cherokee. She loaded carefully selected items, camping gear, including a small tent and sleeping bag, several changes of clothes, her acoustic guitar in its weathered case, a box of cassette tapes featuring artists like Cat Power, Elliott Smith, and Ani DeFranco, a collection of books, most prominently several works by Kerouac, her journals and writing supplies, a camera, and basic toiletries. Notably, she also packed medications for her cat, Bee, whom she left in the care of her roommate. This detail would later take on significance for investigators and family members trying to understand her intentions. If Leah had planned to disappear permanently or harm herself, why make arrangements for her beloved pet's specialized care? Before leaving, Leah placed an envelope on her desk addressed to her roommate. Inside was a handwritten note and some cash for upcoming household bills. The note didn't explicitly state she was leaving on a trip, but made references to Kerouac and contained phrases like, "I'm not suicidal, I'm the opposite," and "I've gone to the woods to deliberate." The careful observer might notice the parallel to Henry David Thoreau's famous line from Walden, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately." These literary references peppered throughout Leah's communications offered windows into her mindset. She saw herself embarking on something meaningful and introspective, not fleeing or escaping. Around midday, according to neighbors who noticed her loading her Jeep. Leah pulled away from the small house on Crest Road for the last time. She didn't tell anyone directly where she was going or when she would return. The only concrete clue to her destination existed in her internet search history and the dog-eared copy of Dharma Bums, in which she had highlighted Kerouac's descriptions of the Pacific Northwest. Her sister, Kara, came by the house the following day, March 10, for a planned visit. Finding no one home, she used her spare key to enter. The house felt strangely still. The cat greeted her, but there was no sign of Leah. At first, Kara assumed her sister had stepped out briefly, but when she noticed the missing backpack and guitar, items Leah treasured, a sense of unease began to grow. It was then that Kara discovered the note on Leah's desk. Unlike the note left for her roommate, this one was longer and more personal. Kara, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to I don't know where. I need some time to think and to see some of the places I've only read about. Don't worry about me, I've taken precautions and I'm bringing the pepper spray you gave me for Christmas. The note continued with practical matters, instructions for BEA's care, locations of important documents, and a promise to call when she could. It ended with a quote from Kerouac's On the Road, "Nothing behind me, everything ahead of me, as is ever so on the road." Kara would later describe reading this note as a moment of competing emotions, concern for her younger sister traveling alone, but also understanding of Leah's need to process her grief in her own way. After all, they had both lost their parents in rapid succession, and people cope with such losses differently. Still, something about the suddenness of the departure left Kara unsettled. It wasn't like her to just vanish without saying goodbye in person, Kara would later tell reporters. Leah was spontaneous, yes, but she was also considerate of others' feelings. That evening, Kara tried calling Leah's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. This wasn't entirely unusual. Leah had mentioned the previous week that her charger was malfunctioning. Still, Kara left a message asking Leah to call when she could, trying to keep the worry from her voice. As days passed with no word from Leah, her bank and credit card statements would provide the first concrete information about her journey. They revealed a westward trajectory across the country, a gas purchase in Tennessee on March 10, a motel charge in Missouri on March 11, another gas stop in Oklahoma later that same day, and more fuel purchases tracking a route through the Plains states and into the Mountain West. The receipts painted a picture of someone moving steadily but not recklessly, stopping to rest at appropriate intervals, making small purchases at convenience stores and cafes along the route. There was a charge at a bookstore in Colorado, a national park entrance fee in Wyoming, and then a series of transactions in Idaho and Washington state. Leah appeared to be following a route similar to one described in Kerouac's works, cutting across the heart of America and heading toward the rugged beauty of the Pacific Northwest. She was making good time, covering approximately 400 to 500 miles per day, suggesting someone purposeful in their journey, not someone aimlessly wandering. Importantly, there was nothing in this financial trail that indicated distress or erratic behavior. The purchases were sensible: food, fuel, occasional lodging, a raincoat at an outdoor store in Idaho. If anything, they showed someone being careful with their resources while steadily advancing toward a destination. What no one knew then was that this ordinary-seeming road trip, the kind thousands of young Americans undertake every year as rites of passage or periods of reflection, would soon become the subject of intense investigation, media coverage, and enduring mystery. By March 13, 2000, Leah Roberts had traversed nearly the entire continent. In just 4 days, she had driven approximately 2,700 miles, crossing mountains, plains, and rivers, passing through small towns and bypassing major cities. Her white Jeep Cherokee, with its distinctive North Carolina plates, must have appeared increasingly out of place as she ventured deeper into the Pacific Northwest. The morning of March 13 found Leah in Brooks, Oregon, a small community about 35 miles southwest of Portland. At approximately 8:15 a.m., she stopped at a Texaco station just off Interstate 5. The gas station attendant, Oregon being one of 2 states that prohibits self-service at gas pumps, would later recall a polite young woman with blonde hair who asked for a fill-up and purchased a large coffee and a map of Washington state. She seemed cheerful, the attendant, Michael Reeves, told investigators. Asked about the weather up north, if the mountain passes were clear. Nothing that would make you remember her, except she had this southern accent that stood out around here. From there, Leah continued north. Her debit card was used at 1:30 p.m. at a Starbucks in Seattle's University District, a vibrant area near the University of Washington campus filled with bookstores, cafes, and the kind of youthful energy that might have appealed to her. What she did in Seattle, whether she met anyone or visited specific locations, remains unknown. By late afternoon, Leah had traveled further north to Bellingham, Washington, a coastal city of about 80,000 residents tucked between the waters of Bellingham Bay and the rising slopes of the North Cascades. Located just 21 miles south of the Canadian border, Bellingham combines a lively college town atmosphere around Western Washington University with the rugged beauty of the surrounding wilderness and maritime environment. It's easy to imagine why this area would appeal to a Kerouac enthusiast like Leah. The author had spent considerable time in this region, working as a fire lookout in the nearby North Cascades and writing about the experience in his book, Desolation Angels. The raw, majestic landscape with its dense forests, snow-capped peaks, and secluded valleys embodied the kind of wild freedom celebrated in beat literature. At 4:45 p.m., security cameras captured Leah withdrawing $80 from an ATM outside a Bank of America branch in downtown Bellingham. She was wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a green fleece jacket, appropriate attire for the cool, damp March weather in the Pacific Northwest. She appeared calm and collected on the footage, showing no signs of distress. Shortly thereafter, Leah was seen at a Frontier Bank, another financial institution in Bellingham, where she exchanged some smaller bills for larger denominations, a detail that might suggest she was preparing for places where access to ATMs might be limited. As evening approached, multiple witnesses placed Leah at the Horseshoe Café, a historic diner in downtown Bellingham that has been operating since 1886. The café, with its vintage decor and local character, is exactly the sort of authentic, non-corporate establishment that would have appealed to someone seeking genuine experiences off the beaten path. According to server Melissa Jenkins, Leah sat at the counter for nearly 2 hours, alternating between writing in her journal and reading a paperback book. She ordered our house special hash and eggs, then just coffee after that, Jenkins recalled. She asked about local landmarks, especially anything connected to beat writers. I remember mentioning that Allen Ginsberg had given a reading at the university years back, and her eyes lit up at that. Another patron at the cafe that evening, a Western Washington University literature professor named David Carlson, later told investigators he had a brief conversation with a young woman matching Leah's description about Jack Kerouac's time in the region. She was particularly interested in Desolation Peak and how to get there, Carlson said. I explained that it was quite remote, especially in March when snow still blocked many of the access roads. She seemed undeterred by that, said something about being prepared for wilderness camping. By 8:30 p.m., Leah had left the cafe. The next confirmed sighting came at 9:15 p.m. at Village Books, a well-known independent bookstore in Bellingham's Fairhaven Historic District. An employee assisted her in locating a detailed topographical map of the Mount Baker Wilderness area and a guidebook to the North Cascades. The credit card purchase of these items provides one of the last definitive timestamps in Leah's known movements. She was very specific about wanting maps that showed Forest Service roads and trails around Mount Baker Highway and the area near Desolation Peak, bookstore employee Thomas Nichols later reported. Not unusual requests around here. We get a lot of hikers and backpackers, but it stuck in my memory because she mentioned she'd driven all the way from North Carolina specifically to explore these areas. At approximately 10 p.m., Leah was seen at a Bellingham movie theater where she purchased a ticket for a late showing of American Beauty, which had recently won the Academy Award for Best Picture. The theater, the Pickford Film Center, specializes in independent and art house cinema, again, a choice consistent with Leah's apparent interests. Whether she actually stayed for the entire film is unknown, no witnesses recall seeing her exit the theater. This is where the confirmed timeline of Leah's movements becomes murky. Her credit and debit cards show no activity after the bookstore purchase. Her cell phone, a relatively new Nokia model, showed no outgoing calls after a brief check-in voice message she left for her sister Kara at approximately 9:45 p.m. on March 13, stating simply that she had made it to Washington State and that the scenery was even more beautiful than I imagined. There are, however, several unconfirmed sightings that investigators have never been able to fully verify or dismiss. A barista at Tony's Coffee House in Fairhaven reported seeing a young woman resembling Leah on the morning of March 14, sitting alone and writing in a journal. A clerk at a nearby outdoor equipment store believes he sold a waterproof map case to Leah that same day, though no credit card record exists for this purchase, suggesting it would have been a cash transaction if it occurred. Perhaps most intriguingly, a Canadian Border Patrol agent reported a possible sighting of Leah at the Peace Arch border crossing between Blaine, Washington and Surrey, British Columbia on the afternoon of March 14. According to this account, a young woman matching Leah's description approached the border on foot, asked some questions about entry requirements, but turned back when informed she would need identification to cross. This potential sighting has never been confirmed, as the border cameras from that area and time period were not preserved. What is known with certainty is that at some point after her confirmed sightings on March 13, Leah drove east from Bellingham along the Mount Baker Highway, State Route 542, which winds through the foothills of the North Cascades and provides access to Mount Baker, a 10,778-foot active volcano beloved by hikers, climbers, and skiers. The highway follows the North Fork of the Nooksack River, cutting through increasingly remote terrain as it climbs in elevation. During March, the landscape would have been particularly dramatic, and potentially treacherous. Lower elevations would have been showing early signs of spring, while the upper reaches would still be gripped by winter conditions, with significant snowpack and the potential for sudden storms. At some point along this journey into the mountains, Leah Roberts vanished. The only witness to whatever transpired next was the dense forest of Douglas firs and western hemlocks that blanket the slopes, standing silent sentinel over one of the most perplexing disappearances in Washington state history. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's continue. The morning of March 18, 2000, broke gray and misty over the North Cascades. A gentle rain, not unusual for the Pacific Northwest in early spring, had been falling steadily since midnight, creating rivulets of water that cascaded down the steep slopes of the mountains and swelled the already rushing streams below. Kevin Murray and Todd Broughton, both employees of the U.S. Forest Service, had set out early that Saturday morning for a trail assessment hike. Their task was to evaluate winter storm damage to a popular hiking path off mile marker 27 on Mount Baker Highway, in preparation for the upcoming tourist season. Both men were experienced outdoorsmen, intimately familiar with the temperamental moods and hidden corners of this wilderness. At approximately 11:30 a.m., as they made their way along a rough logging road that branched off from the main highway, Murray spotted something unusual through the trees below. "At first I thought it was just a reflection off a puddle," Murray would later tell investigators. "But something about it caught my eye. When I looked more carefully, I realized we were seeing sunlight reflecting off metal, a vehicle of some kind down in the ravine." The men carefully made their way down the steep embankment, slipping occasionally on the rain-slick pine needles and moss. What they discovered was Leah's white Jeep Cherokee, nose down in a shallow creek bed, partially obscured by the dense undergrowth. The vehicle appeared to have tumbled down the approximately 30-foot embankment from the logging road above, coming to rest against a massive Douglas fir that had likely prevented it from rolling further into the deeper parts of the ravine. The scene immediately struck both men as strange. The Jeep was well off any main route, on a logging access road that wasn't marked on standard maps and was rarely used during the winter months. The vehicle bore North Carolina license plates, a highly unusual sight in this remote corner of Washington state. Most unsettling, however, was the condition of the Jeep itself. The front end was significantly damaged from the impact, with the hood crumpled and the windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The driver's side airbag had deployed. Yet despite what had clearly been a serious crash, there was no sign of any occupant, no body, no blood, not even footprints leading away from the vehicle, though the recent rainfall might have obliterated such evidence. We approached cautiously, calling out in case someone was injured nearby, Broughton recalled. But the forest was silent except for the rain and the creek. When they reached the Jeep, more puzzling details emerged. The driver's side door was closed but unlocked. The ignition was still in the on position, though the engine had long since died. The headlight switch was also on, suggesting the crash had occurred at night. The battery had become detached during the impact and was lying on the ground nearby. Inside the vehicle, the men found what appeared to be a hastily arranged living space. The back seats had been folded down, creating a flat area where a sleeping bag and pillow had been laid out. Several blankets had been hung over the broken windows, seemingly to provide insulation and privacy. Empty food wrappers and water bottles suggested someone had been camping in the vehicle for at least a short period after the crash. Most baffling to Murray and Broughton was what they found on the passenger seat: Leah's wallet, lying open, containing her North Carolina driver's license, several credit cards, and approximately $2,500 in cash, a substantial sum to leave behind. Next to the wallet sat her checkbook and passport. "That's when we knew something was seriously wrong," Murray said. "Nobody walks away from an accident in a remote area without taking their ID or money. Especially not that much cash." The men immediately hiked back to their Forest Service vehicle and radioed for emergency assistance. Within an hour, deputies from the Whatcom County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene, quickly cordoning off the area and beginning what would become one of the most perplexing investigations in the department's history. Detective James Schroeder, a 17-year veteran of the Sheriff's Department with extensive experience in search and rescue operations, took the lead on the scene. His first priority was determining whether the driver might be injured and lying somewhere nearby, unable to call for help. "In my experience, when someone's involved in a single vehicle accident in a remote area, they typically don't wander far from the crash site," Schroeder would later explain at a press conference. "Either they remain with the vehicle waiting for help, or if they're injured and disoriented, they're usually found within a quarter-mile radius." A search perimeter was established, and by early afternoon, a team of search and rescue volunteers with trained dogs had arrived. The dogs were given items of Leah's clothing from the Jeep to establish her scent, but despite multiple attempts along different trajectories from the crash site, they were unable to pick up any trail leading away from the vehicle. As daylight began to fade, a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging technology was brought in to scan the surrounding area for any heat signature that might indicate a person. The dense forest canopy complicated this effort, but even in areas with clearer visibility, no sign of Leah was detected. Meanwhile, investigators at the crash site continued their meticulous examination of the Jeep and its contents. They catalogued every item: Leah's clothing, her camping equipment, her guitar still in its case in the back, her collection of books, and her journal. The journal's final entry was dated March 13th, describing her arrival in Bellingham and her excitement about exploring the areas where Kerouac had spent time. One of the most puzzling discoveries came when mechanics examined the Jeep's mechanical systems. The gas pedal appeared to have been tampered with, rigged in a way that might have caused it to stick in the depressed position. This raised the disturbing possibility that the crash might not have been a simple accident. The pedal assembly had been manipulated in a manner inconsistent with normal wear and tear or damage from the crash, noted automotive specialist Michael Tanaka, who was brought in to consult on the case. Someone with basic mechanical knowledge could have created this modification fairly easily. This discovery immediately changed the tenor of the investigation. What had seemed like a possible accident followed by a mysterious abandonment now carried the suggestion of something more sinister. Had someone deliberately tampered with Leah's vehicle? If so, when and why? As night fell over the North Cascades, portable floodlights were set up around the crash site, casting eerie shadows through the trees as the investigation continued. The rain had intensified, further complicating efforts to preserve potential evidence in the surrounding area. Inside the Jeep, investigators found 2 additional items of interest: a pair of movie ticket stubs from the Pickford Film Center in Bellingham for a showing of American Beauty on the evening of March 13, and a receipt from a gas station in Everett, Washington dated March 15, 2 days after Leah's last confirmed sighting in Bellingham. The timeline was beginning to seem increasingly strange, Detective Schroeder noted in his case file. If Roberts was in Everett on the 15th, what was she doing for the 2 days between her last sightings in Bellingham and then? And who purchased the second movie ticket? By midnight, with the rain showing no signs of abating and the search having yielded no results, operations were temporarily suspended until daylight. A deputy was stationed near the crash site to maintain the integrity of what was now being treated as a potential crime scene. The following morning, March 19, brought clearer weather and reinforcements. The search radius was expanded to a mile around the crash site. Volunteers from local hiking clubs joined Forest Service personnel and law enforcement in combing the rugged terrain. For 3 days, the search continued intensively. Ravines were explored, streambeds followed, and dense thickets investigated. Calls of "Leah" echoed through the forest, met only by the occasional cry of birds or the rustling of wind through the evergreens. On one occasion, a search dog showed interest in an area approximately a quarter-mile east of the crash site, a steep slope leading down to a fast-moving creek. Investigators carefully examined the area but found no conclusive evidence of human presence. Whether the dog had detected some trace of Leah or had been distracted by wildlife remains unknown. By March 21, when no sign of Leah had been found despite exhaustive efforts, the search was scaled back, though not abandoned. The focus shifted from rescue to investigation. Detective Schroeder and his team began the painstaking process of retracing Leah's known movements and attempting to fill in the gaps in the timeline. The discovery of the Jeep raised more questions than it answered, Schroeder would later write in his case summary. "We had a young woman who had driven cross-country, apparently reached her destination, spent at least a few days in the Bellingham area, and then somehow ended up in a crashed vehicle on a remote logging road with all her possessions left behind. Yet there was no body, no blood evidence suggesting serious injury, and no clear indication of where she might have gone after the crash, if indeed she had been in the vehicle at the time of the accident at all." The Jeep itself was carefully towed from the ravine and transported to a secure facility where forensic specialists could examine it more thoroughly. The investigation was about to enter a new phase, one that would uncover further mysteries and generate theories that continue to be debated to this day. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Department faced an unusual challenge as they delved deeper into Leah Roberts' disappearance. Unlike many missing persons cases where the primary question is, where did they go, this investigation presented multiple layers of mystery. What had brought Leah to this specific remote location? Was she alone at the time of the crash? Had she survived the accident? If so, where had she gone afterward? And perhaps most troublingly, was the seemingly tampered gas pedal evidence of foul play? By March 22, 2000, the forensic examination of Leah's Jeep was yielding mixed results. Technicians found numerous fingerprints throughout the vehicle, but most matched Leah's prints, which had been obtained from items in her Durham apartment. Several unidentified prints were discovered on the exterior door handles and on the steering wheel, not unusual for a vehicle that might have been serviced or valeted during its life, but potentially significant given the circumstances. The prints on the steering wheel were particularly interesting, noted forensic specialist Dr. Andrea Chen. They were positioned in a way that suggested someone other than the registered owner may have been driving the vehicle recently. They were partial prints, not suitable for database matching, but distinct enough from Roberts' prints to indicate another individual. Hair samples collected from the Jeep's interior similarly provided limited insights. Most matched Leah's DNA profile, but several strands found on the driver's seat belonged to an unknown individual. Without a suspect for comparison, however, this evidence remained merely tantalizing rather than conclusive. The most significant finding came from the mechanical examination of the accelerator pedal assembly. Michael Tanaka, the automotive expert consulting on the case, confirmed his initial assessment. Someone had modified the linkage between the pedal and the throttle in a way that could cause the accelerator to stick, Tanaka explained. It wasn't a factory defect or something that would happen accidentally during normal operation or even as a result of the crash. This required deliberate manipulation with basic tools. This discovery led investigators to consider several disturbing scenarios. Had someone tampered with Leah's Jeep while it was parked in Bellingham, leading to an accident when she later drove up Mount Baker Highway? Had someone else been driving the Jeep when it crashed? Or had the tampering occurred after the crash, perhaps to stage what would appear to be an accident? Meanwhile, Detective Schroeder was working to establish a more comprehensive timeline of Leah's movements. The gas station receipt from Everett dated March 15 was particularly puzzling, as it suggested Leah had traveled south from Bellingham before heading east toward Mount Baker. We needed to verify that Roberts herself had made this purchase, Schroeder noted in his case files. The receipt was for a cash transaction, so there was no credit card record to confirm her identity. Investigators visited the Everett gas station, located just off Interstate 5 about 70 miles south of Bellingham. The attendant working that day, Miguel Santos, remembered a transaction that stood out to him, not because of the customer, whom he could only vaguely recall as a young blonde woman, but because of her companions. She wasn't alone, Santos told detectives. There were two guys with her, older than her, maybe 30s. One stayed in the car, a white Jeep, and the other came inside with her. She seemed, not right. Like maybe drunk or on something. Leaning on the guy, you know. I figured they were just road tripping, having fun. Santos couldn't provide detailed descriptions of the men beyond noting that one had a beard and the other wore a Seattle Mariners cap. The gas station security cameras had operated on a 48-hour loop, meaning any footage from March 15 had been overwritten long before investigators arrived. This potential sighting, if accurate, represented a significant development. It suggested Leah might have encountered other individuals after her time in Bellingham, individuals who remained unidentified and who might have been with her, voluntarily or otherwise, just 3 days before her Jeep was discovered crashed. On March 23, investigators received another potentially important lead. A woman named Beverly Ham contacted the sheriff's department after seeing a news report about the missing North Carolina woman. Ham, a waitress at a diner in Glacier, Washington, a small community along Mount Baker Highway about 35 miles east of Bellingham, reported serving a young woman matching Leah's description on what she believed was the evening of March 16. She came in alone around 7 p.m., Ham recalled. Ordered just coffee and pie, sat by the window looking out at the mountains. I remember her because she had this southern accent and was writing in a notebook the whole time. She asked about roads to Desolation Peak, if they were accessible this time of year. According to Ham, the young woman stayed for about an hour before paying in cash and leaving. Ham couldn't be certain of the date but believed it was the Thursday before the weekend when news of the discovered Jeep broke, which would have been March 16, just 2 days before the vehicle was found. If this sighting was indeed Leah, it contradicted the gas station attendant's report of seeing her with 2 men in Everett on March 15. Either one of the sightings was mistaken, or Leah had traveled from Bellingham to Everett and back toward Mount Baker during those days, a circuitous route that made little obvious sense. To further complicate matters, on March 25, investigators received a call from the manager of the Bellingham Mall Cinema who had been reviewing employee records. He reported that on the evening of March 15, the same day as the Everett gas station sighting, a credit card bearing the name L. Roberts had been used to purchase 2 movie tickets. The theater's young ticket seller couldn't recall the specific transaction among the hundreds processed that week, but the timing aligned with the mysterious gap in Leah's known movements. Detective Schroeder found himself piecing together a timeline that refused to form a coherent picture. We had potential sightings of Roberts in 3 different cities over 3 days, he noted. Everett on the 15th with 2 unknown males, Bellingham that same evening, apparently purchasing movie tickets, and Glacier on the 16th alone. Then her vehicle is found crashed on the 18th, with evidence suggesting it might have been there for some time given the makeshift camping setup inside. As March turned to April, investigative efforts expanded beyond Washington state. Detectives contacted authorities in areas along Leah's known travel route from North Carolina to Washington, seeking any reported incidents or surveillance footage that might shed light on whether she had encountered anyone during her cross-country journey who might have later reconnected with her in Washington. They also delved into Leah's personal history, interviewing friends and former boyfriends in North Carolina, reviewing her educational and medical records, and analyzing her journal entries and online activity before her departure. Nothing in this background investigation suggested someone who was suicidal, involved in illegal activities, or fleeing from threats. By all accounts, Leah had been a thoughtful young woman processing grief and seeking meaningful experiences, not someone in immediate danger, until, perhaps, her arrival in the Pacific Northwest. On April 10, the investigation took another unexpected turn when a hiker found a pair of women's pants in a wooded area approximately half a mile from where Leah's Jeep had been discovered. The pants, khaki hiking pants in a size consistent with Leah's build, contained a tissue in one pocket with what appeared to be dried blood. Forensic testing would later confirm the blood matched Leah's DNA profile, recovered from hair samples from her apartment. However, the limited amount of blood was consistent with a minor injury such as a nosebleed or small cut, not the kind of significant trauma that might explain a disappearance. The location of the pants raised further questions. They were found along a faint game trail leading away from the crash site, suggesting Leah might have survived the accident and attempted to walk out of the area, perhaps disoriented or injured. Yet if she had been mobile enough to travel half a mile from the Jeep, why had search dogs been unable to track her scent? And why would she have removed an article of clothing in the cool, damp March weather of the North Cascades? As spring fully arrived in Washington state, transforming the landscape with wildflowers and reducing the snowpack at higher elevations, searches continued on a more intermittent basis. Volunteer groups organized weekend expeditions to comb areas that might have been overlooked during the initial search efforts or that had been inaccessible due to snow conditions. Meanwhile, Detective Schroeder pursued another avenue of investigation: the 2 movie ticket stubs found in Leah's Jeep. The tickets were for the 9:30 p.m. showing of American Beauty at the Pickford Film Center on March 13, the last day of Leah's confirmed movements in Bellingham. The second ticket was particularly intriguing, Schroeder noted. Who was it for? Had Roberts met someone in Bellingham who accompanied her to the movie? If so, this person might have been the last to see her before her disappearance. The Pickford, a small art house theater with just 80 seats, kept minimal records of individual admissions. The staff member working that evening recalled the showing as being about half full but couldn't specifically remember Leah or who might have accompanied her. Investigators canvassed nearby businesses, showing Leah's photograph and asking if anyone remembered seeing her with another person on the evening of March 13. A barista at a coffee shop across from the theater believed she might have seen Leah with a man described as thin, bearded, maybe mid-30s, before the movie, but couldn't be certain given the time that had elapsed. This potential companion remained unidentified, adding another piece to an increasingly complex puzzle. Had Leah met someone during her first day in Bellingham who gained her trust quickly? Was this the same person whose fingerprints were found on her steering wheel? Could this individual have been involved in her disappearance? By late April 2000, the active investigation was generating more questions than answers. With limited physical evidence, conflicting witness accounts, and no clear suspects, the case was reaching an impasse that would frustrate investigators and Leah's family for years to come. As the investigation into Leah Roberts' disappearance continued through the spring and summer of 2000, detectives found themselves navigating an increasingly complex web of reported sightings, potential leads, and theories that sometimes contradicted one another. May 2000 brought a new dimension to the case when Barry Phipps, a resident of Everson, Washington, a small farming community about 15 miles northeast of Bellingham, reported a strange encounter he'd had in mid-March. Phipps, who worked nights at a dairy processing plant, was returning home around 2 a.m. on what he believed was March 14 or 15 when he noticed a white Jeep Cherokee parked at Hunter's Point, a scenic overlook along the North Fork of the Nooksack River. It caught my attention because nobody's usually up there that time of night, especially midweek in March, Phipps told investigators. I slowed down and saw there were 2 people inside. The driver looked like a man, I couldn't see clearly, but he had a beard. There was a passenger who might have been a woman, but I honestly couldn't tell for sure. Phipps hadn't thought much of the encounter until seeing news reports about Leah's disappearance. What stuck with me was that the Jeep had out-of-state plates. That's unusual around here. Detective Schroeder found Phipps' account credible and potentially significant. Hunter's Point was located along the route between Bellingham and Mount Baker Highway, where Leah's Jeep was eventually found. If the vehicle Phipps saw was indeed Leah's, it suggested she wasn't alone during her time in the area, and the presence of an unidentified male companion raised concerning possibilities. June brought another witness forward. Wendy Morrison, a clerk at a convenience store in Maple Falls, a small community along Mount Baker Highway about 23 miles east of Bellingham, reported a disturbing interaction with a young woman she believed might have been Leah. She came in real late, around midnight, probably March 15th or 16th, Morrison recalled. She seemed disoriented, bought a bottle of water and asked to use the phone, but then a man came in and said he'd take care of her. He was being nice, calling her honey and all that, but something felt off. She went with him, though she seemed reluctant. Morrison's description of the woman matched Leah's general appearance, though she couldn't be certain it was the same person when shown a photograph. Her description of the man, tall, thin, with a beard and wearing a dark jacket, loosely aligned with descriptions from other witnesses who had reported seeing Leah with an unidentified male. Investigating these accounts presented challenges. The witnesses' uncertainty about exact dates made it difficult to establish a precise timeline. Surveillance footage that might have corroborated these sightings hadn't been preserved, as most small businesses in the area reused their security tapes every few days. And without a clear identification of the man reportedly seen with Leah, investigators had no specific suspect to pursue. Nevertheless, these accounts suggested a troubling possibility. Leah might have encountered someone during her time in the Bellingham area who, for unknown reasons, had become involved in her disappearance. Whether this was a chance meeting with someone harboring ill intent, or perhaps an initially friendly interaction that took a dark turn, remained unclear. In July 2000, the investigation gained renewed attention when Leah's case was featured on the television program Unsolved Mysteries. The segment generated dozens of tips from across the country, most of which led nowhere but a few of which provided new directions for investigation. One viewer reported seeing a young woman resembling Leah at a truck stop in Central Oregon approximately a week after her disappearance. Another claimed to have encountered her at a hostel in Vancouver, British Columbia. Several viewers reported seeing women matching Leah's description working at various restaurants or shops in the Pacific Northwest. Detective Schroeder and his team methodically followed up on each credible lead, traveling thousands of miles across Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Most sightings proved to be cases of mistaken identity or could not be verified, but the process underscored the challenge of tracking a missing person whose distinctive features, blonde hair, slender build, mid-20s, could match countless other young women. Perhaps the most significant tip came from a viewer in Bellingham who recalled seeing a white Jeep Cherokee with North Carolina plates parked outside a local bar called the Green Frog on what he believed was the night of March 14th. The viewer, a vehicle enthusiast who noticed unusual cars, remembered thinking it was strange to see a Jeep from the East Coast in Bellingham. Investigators interviewed staff and regular patrons of the Green Frog, showing them Leah's photograph. While no one could definitively confirm her presence there, one bartender recalled a young woman with a non-local vibe, who spent time talking to a regular customer known as Lars. Lars Henderson, a 34-year-old carpenter and part-time musician, was located and interviewed in August 2000. He acknowledged occasionally striking up conversations with tourists and out-of-towners at the Green Frog but initially denied any recollection of meeting Leah. After being pressed by investigators, however, Henderson amended his statement. "I might have talked to her," he conceded. "There was a girl, blonde, seemed kind of lost or searching for something. We talked about Kerouac, I remember that because I'm into the beat writers too. But it was just conversation at a bar. She left alone, as far as I know." Henderson provided fingerprints and DNA samples, which did not match the unidentified prints or hair found in Leah's Jeep. While he wasn't eliminated as a person of interest, there was no evidence directly linking him to Leah's disappearance. In September 2000, 6 months after Leah vanished, her sister Kara Roberts visited Bellingham to conduct her own investigation and keep the case in the public eye. Kara walked the streets her sister had likely traveled, spoke with local residents, and made emotional appeals on local television stations for anyone with information to come forward. "Leah isn't just a missing person case," Kara told reporters. "She's my sister. She's someone who loved poetry and music and wanted to experience life deeply. Someone knows what happened to her. Please, if you know anything at all, help bring her home." Kara's visit coincided with a new search effort focused on areas that had been inaccessible during the initial investigation due to snow conditions. As autumn approached and vegetation began to thin, search teams hoped to find evidence that might have been overlooked in the dense summer foliage. These search efforts yielded one potentially significant discovery. In a ravine approximately 1.5 miles from where Leah's Jeep had been found, searchers discovered a tattered backpack partially buried under fallen leaves and pine needles. The backpack contained several items: a water bottle, a small flashlight, a disposable camera with all frames exposed, and a small notebook. The notebook's pages were largely ruined by moisture, but several entries remained legible. One dated March 14 read, "Made it to Bellingham. The mountains here are exactly how J.K. described them. Raw and beautiful and somehow both welcoming and threatening at the same time. Met some interesting people at a coffee shop who told me about a shortcut to Desolation Peak." The entry broke off there, with the remaining text rendered illegible by water damage. Forensic analysis later confirmed the handwriting matched samples of Leah's writing from her journals found in the Jeep and her apartment in Durham. This discovery provided the first concrete evidence that Leah had survived at least a day after her last confirmed sighting on March 13 and had been actively journaling about her experiences. It also suggested she had been seeking directions to Desolation Peak, a significant location in Kerouac lore, and potentially received advice from locals that led her to unfamiliar areas. The disposable camera found in the backpack offered another potential breakthrough. When the film was carefully processed by forensic technicians, most images were too degraded to be useful. However, several frames showed recognizable locations in Bellingham, including Fairhaven Historic District and Boulevard Park along Bellingham Bay. The most intriguing images came at the end of the roll. 3 photos, apparently taken on March 14 or 15 based on their sequence, showed a remote cabin in a wooded setting. No identifying landmarks were visible, but the images clearly depicted a small, rustic structure with a metal roof and stone chimney. Another photo showed the interior of what appeared to be a bar or cafe with distinctive wooden beams and red upholstered booths. These images presented new avenues for investigation. If the cabin could be located, it might provide crucial information about where Leah had been and potentially who she had been with. Similarly, if the bar or cafe could be identified, staff might remember Leah and provide additional insights into her movements. However, despite extensive canvassing of local businesses and distribution of the photos to area residents, neither location was definitively identified. The cabin, in particular, could have been anywhere in the vast forested area surrounding Bellingham or in the foothills of the North Cascades, thousands of square miles containing countless remote structures. As the fall of 2000 progressed, the investigation reached a frustrating plateau. Leads had been followed, witnesses interviewed, physical evidence analyzed, and searches conducted, yet Leah's ultimate fate remained unknown. The case had evolved from a simple missing person investigation into something far more complex and troubling. As the investigation into Leah Roberts' disappearance passed the one-year mark in March 2001, investigators, family members, and armchair detectives had developed several theories to explain the perplexing case. Each theory addressed some aspects of the evidence but left other elements unexplained, a reflection of the complex and contradictory nature of the case itself. The first and most straightforward possibility was that Leah had been the victim of a tragic accident. According to this theory, she had driven up Mount Baker Highway on her own, perhaps seeking the locations described in Kerouac's writings or simply exploring the magnificent scenery of the North Cascades. While navigating the unfamiliar and winding mountain roads at night, she lost control of her Jeep and crashed into the ravine. Injured and disoriented, she may have wandered away from the vehicle seeking help, only to become lost in the vast wilderness surrounding the crash site. The North Cascades area is notoriously rugged, with dense forests, steep terrain, and numerous waterways where someone could easily become disoriented, especially if suffering from a head injury or exposure. In this scenario, Leah might have succumbed to the elements in a location too remote to be discovered by search parties. This theory, while plausible in some respects, failed to explain several critical aspects of the evidence, most notably the apparently tampered gas pedal and the unidentified fingerprints on the steering wheel. It also didn't account for the reported sightings of Leah with unknown individuals in the days before her Jeep was discovered, nor did it explain why her wallet, containing a substantial amount of cash, would have been left behind if she had been able to walk away from the crash. A second theory suggested Leah may have staged her own disappearance. Perhaps the idealistic young woman, inspired by Kerouac's rejection of conventional society, had decided to truly drop out and begin a new life under a different identity. In this scenario, Leah might have arranged the crash scene to make it appear she was missing or had met with foul play, while actually slipping away to start fresh elsewhere. It's not unheard of, noted Dr. Catherine Morrow, a forensic psychologist consulted on the case. Someone experiencing significant life transitions, as Leah certainly was after losing both parents, might find the idea of completely reinventing themselves appealing. Kerouac's writings, with their emphasis on rejecting social conventions and seeking authentic experience, could potentially reinforce such thinking. According to this theory, the cash left in the Jeep might have been a deliberate red herring, with Leah having other financial resources set aside. The makeshift living arrangement in the crashed vehicle could have been staged to suggest she had survived the initial accident, adding further confusion to the narrative. However, those who knew Leah best vehemently rejected this possibility. Her sister Kara, in particular, pointed out that despite Leah's adventurous spirit and desire for meaningful experiences, she had remained deeply connected to her siblings and friends after their parents' deaths. Leah wasn't running away from life, Kara insisted during a press conference marking the one-year anniversary of her disappearance. She was running toward it. There's a huge difference. She would never put us through this kind of pain intentionally. Not after everything our family had already been through. Friends from North Carolina similarly dismissed the idea that Leah would orchestrate such an elaborate deception, describing her as thoughtful and considerate of others' feelings despite her independent streak. The third and most troubling theory was that Leah had encountered foul play, either meeting someone who meant her harm during her time in Bellingham or being targeted as a vulnerable out-of-state traveler. Multiple elements supported this disturbing possibility. The apparently tampered gas pedal suggested potential sabotage, unidentified fingerprints on the steering wheel indicated someone else might have been driving the Jeep, witness reports placed Leah in the company of unidentified males in the days before her disappearance, and the personal belongings left in the vehicle, particularly the substantial amount of cash, suggested she hadn't abandoned the Jeep voluntarily. When you look at the totality of evidence, Detective Schroeder acknowledged in a 2002 interview, you have to consider the possibility that Roberts encountered someone who took advantage of her situation, a young woman traveling alone in an unfamiliar area, perhaps somewhat vulnerable due to her idealistic nature. This theory encompassed several variations. Perhaps Leah had befriended someone in Bellingham who later betrayed her trust. Maybe she had picked up a hitchhiker along Mount Baker Highway who saw an opportunity to rob a solo traveler. Or perhaps she had been specifically targeted by someone who spotted her in town and recognized her as an out-of-towner. The backpack found in autumn 2000, with its mention of meeting interesting people who told her about a shortcut to Desolation Peak, seemed particularly significant in this context. Had Leah been deliberately misdirected to a remote area by someone with harmful intentions? A fourth theory, less commonly discussed but still considered by investigators, was that Leah might have had an untreated mental health crisis exacerbated by grief and the stress of her cross-country journey. In this scenario, she might have experienced a psychological break that led to erratic behavior and ultimately to her disappearance. Some aspects of Leah's journal entries, with their intense focus on Kerouac and existential questions about life's purpose, could potentially be interpreted as showing a fragile mental state. However, mental health professionals who reviewed her writings noted that such philosophical questioning is entirely normal for someone processing profound grief and life transitions in their early 20s. There's a big difference between existential exploration and psychological crisis, noted Dr. Morrow. Roberts' journals show someone deeply engaged with meaningful questions about how to live authentically after experiencing significant loss, not someone detached from reality. Friends and family similarly rejected characterizations of Leah as mentally unstable, describing her as a thoughtful young woman processing grief in her own way, not someone experiencing a psychological crisis. As theories multiplied without definitive evidence to support any single explanation, the case increasingly captured public imagination. Online forums dedicated to discussing unsolved mysteries featured lengthy threads analyzing every detail of Leah's disappearance. Amateur sleuths combed through public records and newspaper archives, seeking connections or patterns that might have been overlooked by official investigators. For Leah's family, this ongoing public interest was both a blessing and a burden, keeping her case in the public eye but also subjecting their personal tragedy to endless speculation and sometimes insensitive theorizing. Every theory, every possibility has crossed my mind at one point or another, Kara Roberts admitted in a 2005 interview. You can drive yourself crazy thinking about all the different scenarios. But at the end of the day, what we want is simply to know what happened to Leah. Where is she? Did she suffer? Is there any chance she's still out there somewhere? As years passed with no definitive answers, the case of Leah Roberts took its place among other mysterious disappearances that continue to haunt the public imagination, cases where an ordinary day somehow became the threshold to an enduring mystery. In the years following Leah's disappearance, the investigation continued through various avenues, cycling between active pursuit of new leads and periods of relative dormancy when no fresh information emerged. In the summer of 2001, a potentially significant tip reached investigators when a former logger named Raymond Winters contacted the Whatcom County Sheriff's Department. Winters reported that in mid-March 2000, he had been driving along a remote Forest Service road near the North Fork of the Nooksack River when he encountered a young woman who appeared disoriented. She was walking along the road, looked kinda lost, Winters told detectives. I stopped and asked if she needed help. She said she was looking for Desolation Peak but thought she'd taken a wrong turn. I told her she was nowhere near there and offered her a ride back to the main highway, but she declined. Winters couldn't positively identify the woman as Leah when shown her photograph, saying it could have been her, but he couldn't be certain. He had initially dismissed the encounter and only came forward after happening to see a television program about the case more than a year later. Investigators found Winters' account credible but impossible to verify conclusively. The timing aligned with Leah's disappearance, and the mention of Desolation Peak was particularly notable given her known interest in Kerouac sites. However, without more definitive identification or physical evidence connecting the sighting to Leah, the lead ultimately added another tantalizing but inconclusive piece to the puzzle. In October 2001, the investigation briefly intensified when construction workers clearing land for a new vacation property near Mount Baker discovered a woman's shoe partially buried in soft earth. The location was approximately 3 miles from where Leah's Jeep had been found. Forensic testing determined the shoe was a similar size to what Leah would have worn, but no DNA evidence could be recovered to confirm whether it had been hers, and the particular style, a brown hiking boot, was a common brand sold throughout the Pacific Northwest. In 2002, Leah's case received national attention when it was featured on the television show, Unsolved Mysteries. The segment included dramatic reenactments of her journey and interviews with family members and investigators. The broadcast generated dozens of new tips from across the country, each of which had to be carefully evaluated by the already stretched resources of the Whatcom County Sheriff's Department. "We followed up on every credible lead," Detective Schroeder later recalled. People reported seeing young women matching Leah's description everywhere from Oregon to Alaska, from coffee shops to remote cabins. Some tips were clearly mistaken identity, but others required serious investigation. One of the more compelling leads came from a viewer in British Columbia who reported encountering a young American woman using the name Lee at a spiritual retreat center near Vancouver Island in late 2000. According to this account, the woman had spoken about traveling through the Northwest after experiencing family tragedy and seemed reluctant to discuss her background in detail. Canadian authorities assisted in investigating this lead, but by the time they located the retreat center, the woman in question had moved on, leaving no contact information. Staff members who reviewed Leah's photograph thought there was a resemblance but couldn't make a positive identification. In 2003, a forensic breakthrough offered new hope when advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to extract genetic material from several previously unidentifiable hairs found in Leah's Jeep. The DNA profile did not match any suspects in the case but was entered into CODI's Combined DNA Index System, in hopes of finding a match in the future if the unknown individual ever entered the criminal justice system. Perhaps the most significant development came in 2005 when a hiker exploring an overgrown game trail approximately 2 miles from the crash site discovered a tattered pair of khaki pants partially concealed under forest debris. Forensic testing confirmed the presence of DNA matching Leah's profile, and where patterns on the clothing were consistent with her size. The location of this clothing item was particularly intriguing, as it was in a direction that hadn't been thoroughly searched during the initial investigation. The pants showed signs of having been exposed to the elements for an extended period, consistent with having been there since around the time of Leah's disappearance. This discovery suggests Roberts may have traveled much farther from the crash site than initially believed possible, noted Detective Schroeder in a press statement. It opens up new search areas and new possibilities about what might have happened after the crash. However, no additional personal effects or remains were found despite an intensive search of the surrounding area. The pants remained an isolated clue, raising as many questions as they answered. Had Leah discarded them while disoriented and suffering from exposure? Had they been transported to this location by wildlife? Or had they been deliberately placed there by someone else? Throughout these years, Leah's sister Kara remained a tireless advocate, working with various missing persons organizations and maintaining a website dedicated to finding Leah. She regularly traveled to Washington State on the anniversary of her sister's disappearance, distributing flyers, meeting with local residents, and keeping the case in the public eye. "Time doesn't heal this kind of wound," Kara said in a 2006 interview. "It just changes the nature of it. Not knowing is its own special kind of pain. Every unidentified body found in the Pacific Northwest, every news story about remains discovered in a remote area, my heart stops each time, wondering if this time it's Leah." As technology advanced, so did investigative techniques. In 2010, the Whatcom County Sheriff's Department digitized all evidence related to Leah's case, creating a comprehensive database that allowed for new correlations and pattern analysis. Cold case detectives revisited witness statements, looking for details that might have seemed insignificant in 2000 but took on new meaning a decade later. Social media also transformed the landscape of missing persons cases. A Facebook group dedicated to finding Leah attracted thousands of members, some with personal connections to the case and others simply interested in helping solve the mystery. These online communities occasionally generated useful tips but also became breeding grounds for speculation and amateur detective work of varying quality. In 2015, on the 15th anniversary of Leah's disappearance, the Sheriff's Department announced they were working with a forensic genealogist to analyze the unidentified DNA from the Jeep using emerging familial DNA techniques. This approach, which had helped solve several high-profile cold cases, offered the possibility of identifying the unknown individual through relatives who might have submitted DNA to public databases. "We're committed to using every available technology and technique," Sheriff Michael Davidson stated at a press conference. "Cases like Leah's are never closed until we have answers. Someone knows what happened to her, and we believe that with advances in forensic science and continued public attention, those answers will eventually come to light." As the years have passed, Leah Roberts' disappearance has taken on a legacy beyond the initial investigation. Her case has become emblematic of the particular vulnerabilities young travelers may face, especially women journeying alone. It has been featured in numerous true crime podcasts, documentaries, and books examining unsolved disappearances in America's wilderness areas. For many, Leah's story resonates because of its inherent contradictions. A journey that began as a soul-searching adventure inspired by literature became a haunting mystery. A young woman seeking meaning after profound loss became herself a profound absence in the lives of those who loved her. A quest for answers about life led to enduring questions about her fate. The places connected to Leah's disappearance have themselves become informal sites of pilgrimage for those touched by her story. Visitors to Bellingham occasionally ask local baristas and bookstore employees about the young woman who vanished 2 decades ago. Hikers in the North Cascades sometimes pause near mile marker 27 on Mount Baker Highway, looking down into the ravine where her Jeep was found and wondering what secrets the dense forest still keeps. For investigators who worked the case, Leah's disappearance often represents the one that got away, the case that, despite their best efforts and the application of ever-advancing forensic techniques, remains unsolved. "There are cases that stay with you throughout your career," reflected Detective Schroeder, who retired from the Whatcom County Sheriff's Department in 2012 but continued to consult on Leah's case. "Leah Roberts is one of those for me. The evidence was there, the Jeep, her belongings, the witness sightings, but somehow the pieces never quite fit together to tell us the complete story." For true crime enthusiasts and amateur sleuths, Leah's case remains particularly compelling because it offers enough evidence to build theories but not enough to conclusively prove any of them. Unlike many missing persons cases where the passage of time diminishes interest, Leah's disappearance continues to attract new generations of armchair detectives drawn to its unique elements and unanswered questions. But beyond the public fascination and investigative complexities, Leah's disappearance represents first and foremost a deeply personal loss for those who knew and loved her. Her brother Heath, who rarely speaks publicly about the case, once described the experience as living with a question mark where there should be a period. Kara Roberts, who has carried the primary burden of keeping her sister's case alive in the public consciousness, expressed similar sentiments on the 20th anniversary of Leah's disappearance in 2020. "People often ask how I've managed to keep going all these years without answers," she said. "The truth is, you don't have a choice. The alternative would be to forget, to stop searching, to abandon Leah, and that's simply not an option. So you learn to live with uncertainty. You learn to carry the weight of not knowing." For Leah's family, certain dates bring particular poignancy. Her birthday on July 23, when they mark another year she isn't there to celebrate; March 9, the anniversary of her departure from North Carolina; March 18, when her empty Jeep was discovered. On these days, they often share memories of Leah, not as a missing person or an unsolved case, but as the vibrant, curious, compassionate young woman they knew and loved. They remember her playing guitar on summer evenings, her passionate discussions about books and ideas, her affection for her cat Bee, her distinctive laugh that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep and joyful. They recall how, even in the midst of her grief over losing their parents, she retained an essential optimism about life and its possibilities. The unanswered questions continue to haunt not just her family but all those who have become invested in her story. What happened after Leah reached Bellingham? Was she alone when her Jeep went off the road? If she survived the crash, where did she go? Did she encounter someone who meant her harm? Does the vast wilderness of the North Cascades hold secrets that may never be revealed? Despite the passage of more than 2 decades, hope remains that someday these questions will find answers. Advances in forensic technology, new witness testimonies, or even confessions could potentially break the case open. Until then, Leah Roberts remained suspended in a state of absence, neither conclusively lost nor found, her true fate known only to the silent forests and mountains of the Pacific Northwest. As this story comes to a close, we're reminded that each unsolved case represents not just a mystery but a person with connections, dreams, and a life interrupted. Somewhere, perhaps, there are answers waiting to be discovered about what happened to Leah Roberts in March of 2000, a young woman who set out on a journey inspired by literature and seeking personal meaning, only to become herself the subject of an enduring, unsolved story. The gentle rain continues to fall, much as it likely did during those fateful days in Washington state when a bright young woman with a copy of Kerouac and a heart full of questions vanished into the misty landscapes of the North Cascades, leaving behind a legacy of mystery that continues to resonate with all who encounter her story. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 2. Granite Falls sits nestled in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, about an hour northeast of Seattle. Population, just under 4,000. The kind of place where the barista knows your order before you speak it, where high school football games are community events, and where the same families have owned businesses on Stanley Street for generations. The town's economy had traditionally revolved around the timber industry, though by 2008, when our story begins, tourism had become increasingly important, with hikers and nature enthusiasts drawn to the nearby wilderness areas and the stunning Granite Falls themselves, a series of cascades tumbling over ancient rock formations dating back millions of years. It was autumn when Rebecca disappeared. September 2008. The maple and alder trees had begun their annual transformation, painting the mountains with splashes of amber and crimson. Mornings were shrouded in a dense fog that would lift by mid-morning, revealing skies of perfect blue. The seasonal rains had not yet settled in for their long winter stay. Rebecca Linden was 26 years old. A graduate of the University of Washington with a degree in environmental science, she had returned to her hometown to work temporarily at the Granite Falls Historical Museum while applying for positions with various environmental organizations. She lived alone in a small blue cottage on Mountain Loop Highway, on the eastern edge of town, a place she had purchased with money inherited from her grandmother. Rebecca was well known and well liked in Granite Falls. The only daughter of Michael and Caroline Linden, she had grown up exploring the forests and climbing the rocky slopes that surrounded the town. Her father had worked for the Forest Service until his retirement, and her mother taught second grade at Granite Falls Elementary School for over 30 years. Friends described Rebecca as thoughtful and independent. She had a quiet confidence and an easy laugh. Her passion for environmental conservation had developed early. As a teenager, she had organized cleanups of the Stillaguamish River and lobbied the town council to implement recycling programs. At college, she had been involved in research on the declining salmon populations in the Pacific Northwest. Though she had left Granite Falls for college, Rebecca had maintained close connections with many childhood friends. She sang in the community choir, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and was known to bring homemade blackberry pies to town events. Her return after graduation was meant to be temporary, just until she secured a position in her field, but she had settled back into small-town life with apparent contentment. There were, however, aspects of Rebecca's life that would only emerge after her disappearance. She kept a journal that revealed a growing sense of disillusionment with her hometown. She wrote of feeling trapped, of seeing the familiar faces and places as constricting rather than comforting. And there was mention of someone she referred to only as D, a person whose identity would become central to the investigation. Her last journal entry, dated September 17, 2008, read, "Meeting D at the Overlook tonight. Maybe this time I'll get answers." Wednesday, September 17, 2008, began as an ordinary day. Rebecca arrived at the museum at 9 a.m., where she was cataloging artifacts from the town's logging history. Security footage shows her leaving at 5:30 p.m. She stopped at Granite Market on her way home, purchasing ingredients for dinner: pasta, mushrooms, garlic, cream, as well as a bottle of moderately priced Merlot. The cashier, Dana Wilkins, remembered chatting with Rebecca about an upcoming art festival in nearby Arlington. Rebecca's blue Honda Civic was captured on a traffic camera turning onto Mountain Loop Highway at 6:07 p.m. A neighbor reported seeing her collect mail from her roadside mailbox around 6:15 p.m. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Rebecca Linden. When she failed to appear at work the following morning, her colleague, Martin Freeman, called her cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. By noon, concerned about her uncharacteristic absence without notification, Martin drove to her cottage. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. Inside, he found evidence of a meal being prepared: vegetables half chopped on a cutting board, a pot of water on the stove, but no sign of Rebecca. Martin called the police at 12:24 p.m. Officer Deanna Morris of the Granite Falls Police Department arrived at 12:40 p.m. Her initial assessment noted no signs of struggle within the home. Rebecca's purse was on the kitchen counter, containing her wallet, ID, and credit cards. Her cell phone was not found. The back door to the cottage was ajar, leading to a small yard that backed up against dense forest. By evening, Rebecca's disappearance had been upgraded from a welfare check to a missing persons case. The tight-knit community rapidly organized search parties, focusing on the trails behind her home that led deeper into the woods. Detective Marcus Shelby took charge of the investigation. A methodical, experienced investigator who had transferred to Granite Falls from Seattle's police department 3 years earlier, Shelby approached the case with both professional thoroughness and personal investment. His daughter had been in the same class as Rebecca in high school. The search of Rebecca's home yielded several points of interest. Her laptop was found open on her bed, the screen showing her email inbox. The last email in her sent folder was to an address identified only as mountainwatcher@gmail.com. The subject line read, "Tonight," and the body of the email contained only the text, 8:30. Our spot. This email had been sent at 5:45 p.m., likely right after she had returned home. Forensic examination of her computer would later reveal that this email address had been used in correspondence with Rebecca for approximately 3 months. The identity of the Mountain Watcher remained unknown. The account had been created using false information and accessed through public Wi-Fi networks. In Rebecca's bedside drawer, investigators found a small notebook containing what appeared to be coordinates and dates. The most recent entry matched coordinates for a location known locally as Pilchuck Overlook, a scenic viewpoint on a forest road approximately 7 miles from Rebecca's home. On the kitchen table sat a manila folder containing newspaper clippings about environmental protests against a proposed expansion of logging operations near Granite Falls. Several articles mentioned confrontations between protesters and employees of Northwest Timber, the company seeking the expansion. The search of the surrounding forest initially yielded nothing significant. However, on the second day, a search dog alerted to an area approximately half a mile behind Rebecca's home, where investigators found a single earring, a small silver leaf design that her mother identified as belonging to Rebecca. Despite intensive searching, its matching pair was not located. As days passed without sign of Rebecca, the investigation expanded in several directions. Detective Shelby established a timeline of Rebecca's final known day, interviewing colleagues, friends, and acquaintances. Rebecca's cell phone records showed her last call was to her mother at 4:15 p.m. on the day of her disappearance, a brief conversation about an upcoming family dinner. Cell tower data placed her phone at or near her home until approximately 8:10 p.m., when it either was turned off or the battery died. The coordinates in Rebecca's notebook led investigators to Pilchuck Overlook, a rocky outcropping offering views of the valley below. Tire tracks indicated recent vehicle activity at the site, but rain in the intervening days had compromised potential evidence. A cigarette but found at the scene yielded DNA that didn't match Rebecca, who wasn't a smoker, or any samples in the criminal database. Investigators interviewed Rebecca's known associates, including former boyfriends. Her most recent relationship had ended amicably 6 months earlier when her ex-partner, Thomas Wilcox, moved to Portland for work. He provided a verified alibi for the night of her disappearance. A deeper dive into Rebecca's work at the museum uncovered something unexpected. She had been researching the history of land ownership around Granite Falls, focusing particularly on transactions involving Northwest timber. Her notes indicated she believed there were irregularities in how certain parcels had been acquired from local indigenous communities decades earlier. This led investigators to Craig Donovan, the regional manager for Northwest Timber. Initial interviews characterized him as defensive and dismissive of Rebecca's research. He acknowledged having met her when she requested company records but denied any further contact. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of September 17, he stated he had been working late at the company office in Everett, a claim partially corroborated by security footage showing him leaving the building at 7:45 p.m., timing that would have allowed him to reach Pilchuck Overlook by the apparent meeting time. As weeks passed without resolution, Granite Falls experienced what many residents would later describe as a fundamental shift in the town's character. The initial shock and unified response gave way to undercurrents of suspicion and fear. Before Rebecca disappeared, I never locked my doors, said Eleanor Mackenzie, who had lived on Stanley Street for over 60 years. Now I check them twice before bed. Community meetings were held at the high school gymnasium, where updates on the investigation were shared and new search efforts coordinated. Rebecca's parents became fixtures at these gatherings, their faces increasingly drawn as hopes for their daughter's safe return diminished with each passing day. Local businesses displayed Rebecca's photo in their windows. The Granite Falls Gazette devoted its front page to the case each week. A reward fund, initially established by the Linden family at $10,000, grew to over $50,000 through community donations. Some residents reported feeling watched when hiking the forest trails that had once been sources of recreation and peace. Parents became more protective of their children. The annual Granite Falls Autumn Festival, scheduled for early October, was nearly cancelled before proceeding as a subdued affair that doubled as a fundraiser for the search efforts. Meanwhile, volunteers continued to comb the dense forests surrounding the town. These searches extended farther into the wilderness areas, focusing on abandoned mining sites, remote cabins, and the network of logging roads that crisscrossed the mountains. 6 weeks after Rebecca's disappearance, a development, hiker Martin Kasdan discovered a woman's blue raincoat tangled in brush near the bank of the South Fork Stillaguamish River, approximately 12 miles east of Granite Falls. The coat was identified as belonging to Rebecca. Her mother recognized a small repair she had made to the left pocket. The location was significant. It was within a mile of a controversial Northwest timber clear-cutting operation that Rebecca had specifically mentioned in her research notes. The discovery of Rebecca's raincoat shifted the focus of the investigation. The area around the river discovery site was searched extensively, revealing a makeshift campsite that appeared to have been abandoned weeks earlier. Among the items recovered, a disposable lighter with the logo of a local bar, the Timberline, fragments of a torn map of the Granite Falls area, and most significantly, a prescription bottle for anti-anxiety medication. Though the label was damaged by exposure to the elements, partial information matched the prescription information of Craig Donovan. When confronted with this evidence, Donovan's story changed. He admitted to meeting Rebecca at Pilchuck Overlook on the night of her disappearance but claimed she was alive when they parted ways. According to his revised statement, Rebecca had contacted him about her research into Northwest Timber's land acquisitions. She had evidence, he said, of fraudulent documents used in transactions dating back to the 1970s, evidence that could potentially invalidate the company's claim to thousands of acres of valuable timber land and expose them to significant legal liability. She wanted money, Donovan told investigators. Said she'd take her findings to the tribal authorities and the press if we didn't compensate her for her silence. I met her to try to talk her down, see the documents for myself." Things got heated. She stormed off, heading down one of the forest trails. That was the last I saw of her. Digital forensics specialists recovered deleted emails from Donovan's company account that contradicted key elements of his story. The emails, exchanged with Northwest Timber's legal counsel, expressed concern about the Linden situation and discussed the potential financial impact if her research became public. One email, sent the morning after Rebecca's disappearance, contained the cryptic line, "Problem addressed. We'll need cleanup of the documentation," she referenced. A search warrant for Donovan's home and vehicle yielded the most damning evidence: Rebecca's missing cell phone, hidden in a box in his garage, and soil samples from his SUV that matched the distinct mineral composition found at the abandoned campsite by the river. Faced with mounting evidence, Craig Donovan confessed to his role in Rebecca Linden's death, though he maintained it was not premeditated murder. His account, given in a recorded interview spanning 6 hours, revealed a story of corporate malfeasance, attempted cover-up, and fatal confrontation. According to Donovan, Northwest Timber had indeed falsified documents decades earlier to acquire land that rightfully belonged to the Stillaguamish tribe. The company's founding executives had bribed local officials to approve the transactions. This history had been carefully buried, known only to a few senior executives, until Rebecca's research began to uncover discrepancies in the public records. When Rebecca contacted Donovan with her findings, the company initially attempted to discredit her research. When that failed, they offered her a position as an environmental consultant, a thinly veiled attempt to silence her through employment. Rebecca declined. The meeting at Pilchuck Overlook was supposed to be a negotiation. Donovan brought $25,000 in cash, authorized by the company's board as a research grant for Rebecca in exchange for her silence and all copies of her evidence. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument when Rebecca revealed she had already shared her findings with tribal authorities and was merely giving Northwest Timber the opportunity to make public amends before the story broke. In Donovan's telling, he panicked. He grabbed for Rebecca's bag, believing it contained the documents. She fought back, and in the struggle, she fell, striking her head on the rocky ground. When he realized she was dead, he transported her body deeper into the forest and buried it near the makeshift campsite where her raincoat was later discovered. The confession led investigators to Rebecca's remains, buried in a shallow grave approximately 1 mile from the campsite. Forensic examination confirmed blunt force trauma to the back of her skull as the cause of death, consistent with Donovan's account of her fall. Craig Donovan was charged with second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. In a plea agreement, he provided testimony against Northwest Timber executives who had authorized the cover-up attempt, leading to additional charges of corporate fraud and conspiracy. The revelation of Northwest Timber's fraudulent land acquisitions resulted in a landmark legal case, with the Stillaguamish tribe ultimately regaining legal title to over 4,000 acres of ancestral land. The company filed for bankruptcy following the settlement and multiple civil suits. Rebecca Linden was laid to rest in the Granite Falls Cemetery in a ceremony attended by hundreds of community members. The town established a scholarship in her name for students pursuing degrees in environmental science or indigenous rights law. The Granite Falls Historical Museum created a permanent exhibit dedicated to Rebecca's research, showcasing her work uncovering the region's complex and sometimes troubling history of land ownership and resource extraction. Her parents, Michael and Caroline, established the Rebecca Linden Foundation, which works to protect forest lands and support investigative environmental journalism. Each year on the anniversary of her disappearance, community members gather at Pilchuck Overlook, no longer a place of tragedy but transformed into a site of remembrance and environmental education. In the years since Rebecca's death, Granite Falls has changed. The community's trust was shaken, but ultimately strengthened by collective grief and pursuit of justice. The town's economy has shifted away from dependence on timber, embracing sustainable tourism and environmental conservation, a lasting legacy of the young woman who loved these forests enough to defend their history and future. As for the whispers in Granite Falls, they continue among the pines and along the river banks. But now they tell a different story, not just of tragedy, but of truth revealed and justice served, however imperfectly, in a small town nestled in the shadow of the mountains. Story 3. December 1, 1948. Summer was just beginning in the southern hemisphere. In Adelaide, South Australia, people were enjoying the warm weather at Somerton Beach, a popular seaside destination along the Gulf St. Vincent. The beach was known for its pristine sandy shores and clear waters, drawing families and beachgoers from across the region. At approximately 6:30 in the morning, a couple taking an early stroll along the shoreline noticed something unusual. A man was sitting propped against the seawall, his legs extended toward the water. At first glance, he appeared to be sleeping, perhaps someone who had enjoyed the evening air and dozed off. He was well dressed in a suit despite the beach location, wearing a white shirt, tie, and polished shoes. His position seemed relaxed, almost as if he were watching the sunrise over the water. The couple continued their walk, thinking little of the scene. When they returned along the same path about an hour later, they noticed the man hadn't moved. His position remained unchanged, even as other early morning beachgoers began to populate the area. Concerned, the man approached and spoke to the seated figure. There was no response. Upon closer inspection, the man appeared to be deceased, though there were no obvious signs of distress or trauma. His body was still supple, suggesting he had not been dead for long. The police were immediately contacted. John Lyons, a constable with the Adelaide Police, was among the first officials to arrive at the scene. The deceased man appeared to be in his early 40s, in good physical condition, with well-maintained hands suggesting he didn't perform manual labor. He had gray-blue eyes and reddish-blonde hair with a distinctive ginger tinge at the temples. He stood approximately 5 feet 11 inches tall with a muscular build. The man's suit was of good quality but unusual for the beach setting. His shoes were meticulously polished, so clean that investigators would later note it seemed as though someone had cleaned them after the man had died. Even more curiously, all the labels had been removed from his clothing, leaving no identifying marks or tags that might indicate where the items had been purchased. A search of his pockets revealed few clues: a used bus ticket to Glenelg Beach, not Somerton, an unused second-class train ticket to Henley Beach, a packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, a half-empty pack of cigarettes, and a box of Bryant and May matches. Notably absent were a wallet, cash, or any form of identification. A comb was also found, American in style, which was somewhat unusual for Australia at that time. As the morning progressed, more officers arrived, including Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean, who would become deeply involved in the investigation. The body was transported to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, where Dr. John Bennett Barclay performed the initial examination. The mystery was already taking shape: who was this well-dressed man, and why had he died alone on Somerton Beach with no identification? The autopsy conducted by pathologist Dr. John Matthew Dwyer revealed more questions than answers. The Somerton man, as he would come to be known, was estimated to be around 40 to 45 years old and in excellent physical condition, resembling an athlete. His well-developed calf muscles suggested he might have been a dancer or a runner. The cause of death was determined to be heart failure, but the circumstances were suspicious. Dr. Dwyer noted congestion in the man's organs, particularly in the liver and spleen, which suggested poisoning. However, toxicology tests available at the time revealed no trace of known poisons. The man's last meal appeared to have been a pastry, possibly a meat pie, consumed roughly 3 to 4 hours before death. One of the most striking findings was the condition of the man's organs. Dr. Dwyer observed that the heart was in excellent condition, making natural heart failure seem unlikely for someone of his age and physical fitness. The congestion in the man's stomach and liver pointed to some kind of toxin, yet none could be identified using the forensic techniques of 1948. Later toxicology tests would examine the possibility of digitalis or strychnine poisoning, both of which can cause heart failure without leaving easily detectable traces. But the results remained inconclusive. Whatever had killed the Somerton man had done so without leaving an identifiable signature. As the pathological examination continued, another unusual detail emerged. The man's spleen was dramatically enlarged, approximately 3 times normal size. This finding further suggested some form of poisoning or perhaps a rare medical condition. Additionally, blood had pooled in the man's back, indicating he had died lying on his back and then been moved to the seated position where he was found. With no identification and no match in the missing persons reports, police turned to the public for help. On December 2, 1948, the Adelaide newspapers published a description of the man and the circumstances of his discovery. Dozens of people came forward claiming they might have seen him in the area, but none of the leads provided conclusive identification. One witness reported seeing a man matching the description lying in the same spot the evening before, around 7 p.m. The man had been raising and lowering his right arm, which the witness initially thought might be someone exercising or perhaps hailing a friend. In retrospect, investigators considered whether these might have been the man's final movements as he was experiencing the effects of whatever caused his death. Detective Sergeant Lean was determined to identify the deceased. He arranged for the body to be embalmed, an unusual step for an unidentified person, but one that would prove fortuitous as the investigation stretched on for decades. The man's fingerprints and dental records were taken, and a plaster death mask was created to preserve his facial features. For weeks, the body remained in the morgue while police exhausted every conventional method of identification. They checked military records, immigration files, and dental records. They contacted authorities across Australia and internationally. The man's fingerprints were compared against records in Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States through their respective agencies. All inquiries led nowhere. It was as if the man had never officially existed. As January 1949 approached with no breakthrough in identifying the deceased, authorities prepared for a burial. But before that could happen, a crucial discovery would add another layer to the already complex mystery. On January 12, 1949, over a month after the discovery of the body, staff at the Adelaide railway station made a significant discovery. While inventorying items in their lost property office, they found a brown suitcase that had been checked into the station's luggage room on November 30, 1948, the day before the Somerton man was found. The timing immediately raised suspicions, and Detective Lean was called to examine the suitcase. Inside, he found an assortment of clothing, including pajamas, slippers, a dressing gown, and several other items. Like the clothing on the deceased, many of these items had their labels removed. However, a few tags remained intact, including the name T. Keane on a tie and the name Keane on a laundry bag. Was T. Keane the identity of the Somerton man? Police conducted extensive searches for anyone by that name who was missing or had entered Australia around that time. No matches were found. Some investigators speculated that the laundry tags might have been left deliberately to mislead, or perhaps the clothing had been purchased second-hand with the previous owner's name still attached. The suitcase also contained a table knife with the handle broken off, a stenciling brush of the type used by merchant seamen to mark cargo, a pair of scissors with sharpened points, and thread that matched repairs made to the man's trousers. There was also an unusual coat, a Stamina brand jacket, which was sold only in Australia, suggesting some local connection. But perhaps the most intriguing item was a distinctive red check dressing gown. It had been altered. Someone had crudely repaired the torn pocket using an unusual orange thread. This same distinctive thread had been used to repair the trousers the Somerton man was wearing when found, creating a direct link between the suitcase and the deceased. Meanwhile, another crucial piece of evidence had emerged. During a more thorough examination of the man's clothing, investigators discovered something they had initially missed: a small, tightly rolled piece of paper hidden in a small fob pocket in the man's trousers. On this paper were printed 2 words, "Tamam shud." The phrase, meaning finished or ended in Persian, was later identified as being from the final page of a collection of poems called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The Rubaiyat was a popular book of Persian poetry translated by Edward Fitzgerald, widely available in Australia at the time. The torn piece appeared to have been ripped from the very last page of such a book, where these words would traditionally appear as a closing statement. This discovery shifted the investigation dramatically. Was this a suicide note of sorts? A message? Or something more cryptic? Police launched a public appeal for anyone who might be missing the final page from their copy of the Rubaiyat. For months, this appeal went unanswered. Then, in July 1949, a man came forward with an extraordinary story. He had found a rare first edition copy of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his car, which had been parked near Somerton Beach around the time of the man's death. The book was missing the words, Tamam Shud, from its last page, and when compared, the torn piece from the Somerton man's pocket matched the tear in the book perfectly. The discovery of the book created a promising lead, but what investigators found inside it would transform the case into something far more mysterious. Examining the book under strong light, detectives discovered faint indentations on one of the pages. Someone had written on an overlying piece of paper, leaving these markings behind. When enhanced, these indentations revealed what appeared to be a code, 5 lines of seemingly random capital letters with the second line struck through. The code read: Rugobabd Mliawit Bimpanit Mliaboaakit and Samstgab. Cryptographers from Australia's military and intelligence services examined the code but were unable to decipher it. Some suggested it might be an amateur code, perhaps the first letters of words in a message. Others believed it could be a professional encryption system. To this day, despite numerous attempts by codebreakers worldwide, the meaning of these letters remains unknown. But the book held one more vital clue. Written in the back cover was a telephone number, along with what appeared to be the name, Jestin. Detective Lean traced the phone number to a woman living in Glenelg, a beach suburb of Adelaide just a few miles from where the body was discovered. For privacy reasons, her real name was never publicly released. In all official documents, she was referred to only as Jestin. When detectives visited the woman, she appeared visibly shocked upon seeing the plaster bust of the Somerton man, though she denied knowing him. She told police she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, which she had given to a man named Alfred Boxall during World War II, when she had worked as a nurse at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney. For a moment, investigators thought they had solved the case. Perhaps Alfred Boxall was the Somerton man. But that theory collapsed when Alfred Boxall was found very much alive in Sydney, still in possession of his copy of the Rubaiyat, complete with an inscription from the woman and its Tamam Shud page intact. Though Jestin continued to deny any connection to the Somerton man, several details raised investigators' suspicions. Her home was less than a half-mile from where the body was found. She had not reported her copy of the Rubaiyat missing, despite the nationwide appeal. And perhaps most tellingly, when asked to write out the code letters for comparison with the writing in the book, she became extremely anxious. Adding another layer to the mystery, Jestin was found to have had a son born in 1947. Some investigators noted unusual physical similarities between her child and the Somerton man, particularly rare dental and ear features. Both had a condition where the upper lateral incisors were missing, requiring the canine teeth to be moved into position next to the front teeth. Both also had similar ear structure, with the upper ear hollow, Simba, larger than the lower hollow, Kavam, a feature found in only 1 to 2% of the Caucasian population. Despite these connections, Jestin maintained she had never seen the man before. In later years, she would reportedly tell her daughter that she had indeed known the Somerton man but couldn't reveal his identity. This alleged confession, however, came to light only decades later and couldn't be verified. The investigation began to stall. With no formal identification, the Somerton man was finally buried on June 14, 1949, in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery. The headstone simply read, "Unknown Man." Detective Lean kept copies of the man's fingerprints and dental records, hoping that someday, someone would come forward with information. As the initial investigation cooled, the timing and circumstances of the Somerton man case began to attract attention from Australia's security services. The late 1940s marked the beginning of the Cold War, and Australia had recently established its own domestic intelligence organization, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO, in March 1949. The mysterious nature of the death, the indecipherable code, and the missing labels from clothing all suggested to some that the Somerton man might have been involved in espionage. Adding to these suspicions was the location. Somerton Beach was relatively close to the Woomera rocket range, a highly sensitive weapons testing facility established in 1947 through Anglo-Australian cooperation. The unidentified poison that may have caused the man's death also drew parallels to known espionage practices of the era. Intelligence agencies worldwide were known to use exotic and difficult-to-detect poisons for clandestine eliminations. The Soviet Union, in particular, had developed an arsenal of such substances, including ricin and thallium. Another element supporting the espionage theory was the possible connection to Jestin. During World War II, she had worked as a nurse at a military hospital, a position that would have given her access to certain restricted areas and information. Some theorists suggested she might have been a contact or cutout for an intelligence network. The code found in the rubaiyat further fueled speculation. Professional cryptographers noted that its arrangement, 5 lines of apparently meaningless capital letters, bore similarities to one-time pad encryption methods used by Soviet intelligence during that period. One-time pads, when properly used, create unbreakable codes, which might explain why the sequence has never been deciphered. Adding another layer to the international intrigue theory was the fact that the rubaiyat itself was discovered at a time when tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union were escalating dramatically. The Berlin blockade had begun in June 1948, just months before the Somerton man was found. The first Soviet nuclear test would follow in August 1949, ending the American nuclear monopoly far sooner than Western intelligence had predicted. The microscopic examination of the Somerton man's clothing revealed another curious detail. His coat contained a peculiar feather stitching pattern typically found only in garments made in America, not Australia or Britain. This suggested he might have traveled internationally or had connections abroad. Some researchers later noted that the suitcase found at the railway station contained clothing that would fit a cold European climate rather than the Australian summer. The presence of a table knife with a broken handle in the suitcase raised questions as well. Was this a makeshift tool for microfilm concealment, as was common in espionage tradecraft of the era? Jestin herself had interesting connections. She was reportedly fluent in Russian and interested in communist ideology, according to some accounts from people who knew her during the war years. These details, while circumstantial, added to the tapestry of international intrigue surrounding the case. In the decades that followed, researchers would discover that the period of late 1948 was one of significant activity for Soviet intelligence in Australia. The Venona Project, a counterintelligence program that decrypted Soviet diplomatic communications, later revealed that there were active Soviet networks operating in Australia at precisely this time, primarily focused on gathering information about British weapons testing at Woomera. Whether the Somerton man was a spy, Soviet, British, American, or otherwise, or simply caught up in events beyond his control, remains unknown. The Cold War context provides a compelling backdrop for many of the case's unusual elements, but hard evidence connecting him definitively to intelligence work has never emerged. As the years passed, the case gradually receded from public memory, becoming little more than an unusual footnote in Adelaide's history. That is, until advances in forensic science and a new generation of investigators would breathe fresh life into the mystery. For decades, the Somerton man case lay dormant. Occasionally, amateur sleuths or journalists would revisit the mystery, but little progress was made. Then, in the 1970s and 1980s, advancements in forensic techniques sparked renewed interest in the case. In 1978, 30 years after the discovery of the body, chemist Geoffrey Chaney examined the available reports and proposed a new theory about the cause of death. Based on the description of congestion in the man's organs and the lack of identified poison, Chaney suggested that the Somerton man might have died from digitalis poisoning. Digitalis, derived from the foxglove plant, affects the heart directly and might explain the sudden cardiac failure in an otherwise healthy individual. By the 1990s, the Internet had created a global community of amateur investigators fascinated by the case. Online forums dedicated to discussing and analyzing the evidence emerged, with participants from around the world exchanging theories and information. One of the most dedicated was Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, who began researching the case in 1995 and has continued his investigations for decades. Abbott approached the mystery from multiple angles, using modern scientific methods to re-examine the original evidence. He conducted detailed analysis of the code, suggesting it might be the first letters of words in a poetic suicide note. He also made a compelling case that the book itself, Edward Fitzgerald's translation of the Rubaiyat, might be significant, as its themes deal heavily with life, death, and the transient nature of existence. In the early 2000s, Abbott also focused on the physical characteristics of the Somerton man, particularly his unusual ears. The upper hollow of his ear, the cimba, was larger than the lower hollow, the cavum, a rare genetic trait found in only about 1 to 2% of the Caucasian population. This same trait was visible in photographs of Justin's son, strengthening the theory of a biological connection between them. In 2009, Abbott went public with his theory that the Somerton man might have been the father of Justin's child, conceived during a brief affair. This would explain both the genetic similarities and her reluctance to identify him publicly. By this time, Justin had passed away, taking whatever secrets she held to her grave. The quest for DNA evidence became the new frontier in the investigation. In 2011, Abbott and his team petitioned the South Australian Attorney General to exhume the Somerton man's body to obtain DNA samples. Their request was initially denied, with officials citing the low likelihood of retrieving usable DNA from a body buried for over 60 years and the significant cost involved. Undeterred, Abbott and his colleagues looked for alternative sources of the man's DNA. They discovered that the plaster death mask created in 1949 might contain hair follicles or skin cells. Hair from the man's head and pubic region had also been retained as evidence, though these samples contain mitochondrial DNA rather than the more informative nuclear DNA needed for comprehensive testing. In 2018, a major breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman named Rachel Egan, who believed she might be the granddaughter of the Somerton man through Justin's son, provided her DNA for comparative analysis. The results were not conclusive but showed intriguing genetic markers consistent with the limited samples available from the Somerton man. Meanwhile, advances in genetic genealogy, the same techniques that had identified the Golden State Killer in 2018, offered new hope for identifying the man. These methods can potentially identify relatives through DNA databases, even with limited genetic material. The growing public and scientific interest finally had an impact. In May 2021, South Australian authorities approved the exhumation of the Somerton man's remains. On May 19, 2021, his body was carefully removed from the West Terrace Cemetery for comprehensive forensic examination using modern techniques. Scientists extracted samples from the man's teeth, bones, and hair, hoping to obtain enough genetic material for a full DNA profile. They also conducted isotope analysis of his bones, which can potentially reveal where someone lived during different periods of their life based on the chemical composition of water and food consumed. The initial results from the exhumation were promising. Forensic anthropologist Tegan Lucas was able to confirm some of the physical characteristics noted in the original autopsy, including the unusual ear structure. High-resolution CT scans revealed previously undetected details about the man's health and physical condition. And most importantly, laboratory technicians were able to extract what appeared to be viable DNA from dental pulp preserved inside his teeth. As of our current date, the full DNA analysis results have not been publicly released, though researchers remain hopeful that modern technology will finally put a name to the Somerton man after more than 70 years of anonymity. If successful, genetic genealogy techniques could potentially identify his family lineage and perhaps confirm or refute the long-standing theory of his connection to Justin and her son. Over 7 decades, numerous theories have emerged to explain the Somerton Man mystery. Each attempts to make sense of the bizarre collection of clues, the removed labels, the cryptic code, the Persian phrase, and the apparent connection to Jestin. The espionage theory remains one of the most popular explanations. In this scenario, the Somerton Man was a spy, perhaps Soviet, British, or American, who was eliminated because he knew too much or had become a liability. The code in the book might have been operational instructions or a dead drop location. The removed labels would be consistent with tradecraft techniques to obscure identity. And the exotic, undetectable poison would fit with known intelligence agency methods. A variation on this theory suggests the man might have been a courier rather than a full agent, someone tasked with delivering microfilm or documents to a contact in Adelaide, possibly Jestin herself. His death could have been the result of a meeting gone wrong or a deliberate silencing by opposing intelligence services. The romantic theory offers a different perspective. In this scenario, the Somerton Man was in love with Jestin, but their relationship ended tragically. Perhaps he was the father of her child, born in 1947, and had come to Australia to see his son or reconcile with her. The tamam shud phrase, meaning, it is ended, takes on a poignant significance in this context, possibly indicating a suicide prompted by romantic rejection. Supporters of this theory point to the proximity of the body to Jestin's home, the physical similarities between the Somerton Man and her son, and her apparent emotional reaction when shown the plaster bust. The code, in this interpretation, might be the initials of a personal message or even a poem expressing his feelings. A third major theory proposes that the man was involved in black market activities during the post-war period. Rationing was still in effect in Australia in 1948, and smuggling of restricted goods was common. The unusual stitching on his clothes, suggesting American origin, could indicate involvement in importing goods from the United States. His death might have resulted from a deal gone wrong or retribution from criminal associates. The suicide theory must also be considered. The tamam shud phrase certainly suggests an ending deliberately chosen. Perhaps the man traveled to Adelaide, removed identifying features from his clothing, and took his own life using a poison that would be difficult to detect. The code could be a personal message comprehensible only to its intended recipient, possibly Jestin. Whatever the truth, the Somerton Man case has had a profound cultural impact, embedding itself in Australian folklore and the global community of mystery enthusiasts. The case has inspired novels, documentaries, podcasts, and countless internet discussions. It has been featured in university criminology courses and studied by intelligence historians. In Adelaide itself, the case has become part of local lore. Tours of Somerton Beach often include the story, and the burial site at West Terrace Cemetery became something of a pilgrimage spot for mystery enthusiasts before the 2021 exhumation. The phrase, tamam shud, has entered the local lexicon as shorthand for an unsolvable mystery. The enduring fascination with the case speaks to something fundamental in human psychology, our discomfort with unresolved narratives and unexplained phenomena. The Somerton Man represents a puzzle that crosses disciplines, from cryptography and espionage to genetics and toxicology. It challenges us to make meaning from fragments and to accept that some mysteries may remain permanently beyond our grasp. As we approach the present day, the Somerton Man case continues to evolve. The 2021 exhumation marked a significant milestone in the investigation, offering the best hope yet for identifying the mysterious figure who washed up on Adelaide's shores in 1948. While we await the full results of the DNA analysis, researchers continue to explore other avenues. The code, those 5 lines of capital letters, remains the subject of intense scrutiny by amateur and professional cryptographers alike. Some have suggested it might be a form of VOT cipher, variable order transposition, a type of encryption used during World War II. Others believe it could be a more personal code, perhaps even a form of shorthand the man used for private notes. The book itself, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, has been thoroughly analyzed. The particular edition found in the doctor's car was determined to be a rare first edition of Edward Fitzgerald's translation, published by Whitcomb and Toombs in New Zealand. Only a handful of these editions were ever printed, making its presence another unusual element in an already strange case. The contents of the Rubaiyat are themselves intriguing in this context. The poems deal extensively with themes of mortality, the transient nature of life, and the inevitability of fate. One verse in particular seems eerily appropriate to the case. The moving finger writes, and, having writ, moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. In recent years, researchers have also focused on the man's clothing and personal effects. Modern analysis of the thread used to repair his clothing confirmed it was an unusual orange thread, rarely used in commercial garment repair at that time. The cigarettes in his pocket, Kenseta's brand, were available in Australia but more common in the United Kingdom, suggesting a possible British connection. The suitcase found at the railway station continues to yield clues as well. The brand of the suitcase was determined to be a lamb sack, manufactured in Australia but with certain components imported from Britain. The pattern of wear on the case suggested it had been used extensively, perhaps indicating frequent travel. One of the most promising developments has come from genealogical research. Professor Derek Abbott and his team have extensively traced Jeston's family tree, identifying living descendants who might share DNA with the Somerton man if the paternity theory is correct. Several of these individuals have provided DNA samples for comparison with the material extracted during the exhumation. Parallel to the scientific investigation, cultural and historical researchers have been examining the broader context of Adelaide in the late 1940s. They've uncovered information about the social circles Jeston moved in, including her involvement with a local dance studio where she met her husband. This has led some to speculate that the Somerton man's unusually developed calf muscles, noted in the autopsy, might indeed indicate he was a dancer who had met Jeston through shared interests. The international dimension of the case has also seen renewed scrutiny. Researchers have been examining declassified intelligence files from the period, looking for any mention of operations in South Australia that might connect to the case. The proximity of the Woomera rocket range, where Britain was developing and testing missile technology, remains a tantalizing potential link to espionage activities. As technology continues to advance, new tools become available to investigators. Artificial intelligence programs have been applied to the code, running millions of possible decryption scenarios. Forensic genetic genealogy, the technique that has solved numerous cold cases in recent years, offers the potential to identify the man even without a direct DNA match in existing databases, by identifying distant relatives and reconstructing family trees. The mystery of the Somerton man represents one of the most enduring puzzles in criminal history. From the morning of December 1, 1948, when his body was discovered on an Australian beach, through more than 7 decades of investigation, the case has defied conventional explanation. What we know for certain is limited. A man died under mysterious circumstances, with no identification, his labels removed, and a cryptic phrase torn from a book of Persian poetry in his pocket. Beyond these facts lies a labyrinth of possibilities. Was he a spy caught in the opening moves of the Cold War? A heartbroken lover coming to see a child he would never meet? A smuggler whose dealings turned deadly? Or someone else entirely, whose true story we have yet to imagine? Perhaps by the time you hear this, DNA analysis will have finally put a name to the Somerton man, closing at least one chapter in this remarkable story. Or perhaps he will remain as he has been for generations, a silent figure whose very anonymity continues to captivate our imagination and challenge our understanding of what it means for something to truly be finished. As you drift toward sleep with the sound of rain in your ears, I invite you to consider the words that have defined this mystery, Tamam Shud. In their original context in the Rubaiyat, they mark not just an ending, but the completion of something meaningful. Whatever fate befell the Somerton man on that summer day in 1948, his story, far from ending, has woven itself permanently into the fabric of our collective fascination with the unexplained. Story 4. A bright Sunday afternoon. A child, full of life, playing in her yard. The kind of day that felt simple, safe, the kind of day families remember without a second thought. The sun was high, casting golden warmth over the neighborhood. Birds called out lazily from the trees. Neighbors tending to their gardens. Cars rolling down the quiet street at a leisurely pace. And in that moment, she was there, 6-year-old Gracelyn Vick, laughing, running, completely unaware that these small, ordinary actions would be the last ones seen by anyone. A mother's watchful eye scanned the yard. Just a routine glance, the kind parents do without thinking. She stepped away for a moment. Just a moment. When she looked back, Gracelyn was gone. No sounds of distress. No sign of struggle. No open gate. No hurried footsteps fading into the distance. Gone. Hours stretched on. Calls were made. The search began. Her name echoed through the streets. Friends, neighbors, everyone searching. The sun sank lower, but no trace of her emerged. Then, just as hope hung by a thread, Gracelyn was found. Before that fateful afternoon, before her name became the centerpiece of a tragedy, Gracelyn was simply a child. A bright-eyed girl who loved to chase butterflies in the backyard, who insisted on wearing mismatched socks, who giggled at her own jokes even when no one else understood them. There's something about childhood that makes time feel infinite. The days stretch long, filled with adventure and boundless curiosity. Gracelyn was no exception. She lived as children do, without hesitation, without fear, always ready to explore, always eager to discover something new. She had a habit of humming to herself, a tune only she seemed to know. At times, it was soft and absent-minded, the kind of melody a child carries without realizing. Other times, it was loud and full of energy, when she ran through the house, when she climbed onto the couch and jumped like it was her own tiny stage. She adored stories. Fairy tales, bedtime stories, even the everyday ones, the kind her mother told about growing up, the kind her father shared about silly things that had happened at work. If there was a story to be told, she was the first to listen, eyes wide, completely immersed. "Tell me one more," she would say, tugging at her mother's sleeve just before bedtime, even when her eyelids were already heavy. Just one more. And if she got that extra story, she'd fall asleep midway through, curled up with her stuffed rabbit, Ollie, the soft rise and fall of her breath marking the end of the day. Ollie wasn't just a toy to her. He was a constant companion. He had been with her since she was barely old enough to walk. Whenever she felt nervous, his small, plush body was the first thing she reached for. When she was excited, she squeezed him tightly, bouncing on her heels. And if she ever had a secret, Ollie was the one to hear it first. To outsiders, she might have seemed like any other child, playful, carefree. But to those who knew her, Gracelyn was special. She had a kind of light that made even the simplest moments feel warm. Emily Vick was a mother who understood loss. It wasn't something she spoke about often, but it lived in her, the kind of grief that never truly fades, only settles into the background of daily life. Before Gracelyn, before she built a home of her own, Emily had lost someone close to her, a sibling. A sudden tragedy, a wound that time could only soften but never fully heal. Perhaps that was why she loved so fiercely. Why she was protective in ways that sometimes seemed overly cautious. When she became a mother, she promised herself one thing: Gracelyn would always know she was loved. She would never feel alone. She would never question whether she was enough. "She was everything to me," Emily said later, voice barely above a whisper. Everything. Mark Vick was different, quieter. A man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice carried weight. He worked long hours, but his favorite part of the day was always the moment he stepped through the door and heard Gracelyn's tiny footsteps racing toward him. "She didn't just say hi," he recalled, shaking his head with a soft chuckle. "She tackled me. Every single night, no exceptions. They weren't a perfect family. The bills piled up. Stress ran high. There were nights when Emily sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, trying to balance expenses, worrying about the future. But none of that mattered in the moments that counted. In the moments when Gracelyn climbed into their bed in the morning, stealing their pillows. In the moments when she dragged them outside to see a butterfly, convinced it was the prettiest thing in the world. Love was never in short supply in the Vick household. And that was what made the loss so unbearable. If anyone had asked the Vicks how life was going in the days leading up to April 13th, they would have said, normal. There was nothing unusual. No warning signs. No eerie premonitions that hinted at what was coming. Saturday night, Gracelyn had fallen asleep on the couch, her arms wrapped around Ollie. She had spent the day playing, laughing, running in circles until exhaustion finally caught up with her. She never made it to her bed, Emily later said. She was out like a light. Sunday morning, she was up before the sun had fully warmed the earth. Shoes on, ready to go outside, eager to play before breakfast. 5 minutes, Mama, she had asked, pulling on her shoes before her mother could even answer. It was normal. Routine. Emily glanced at the clock, too early for breakfast, but there was no harm in a few moments of play. Just a little while, she told her daughter, then you come in and eat. Gracelyn nodded eagerly, her little feet bouncing with excitement. She stepped outside. The world was still quiet. The neighborhood, just starting to wake. A few birds chirping from the trees. The occasional hum of a car passing down the street. She ran toward the grass, her tiny hands brushing against the dew-coated blades. Emily watched from the window. Then, for just a moment, she stepped away. They say time moves differently in moments of loss. That second stretch. That reality bends. Emily was gone for less than a minute. Not even long enough to consider it strange. She reached for something, perhaps a dish, perhaps a cloth, her mind would later struggle to remember. And when she stepped back to the window, Gracelyn wasn't there. No movement. No small figure dancing through the yard. No laughter echoing through the morning air. At first, Emily thought nothing of it. Maybe she had wandered out of sight, toward the side of the house, or behind the bushes. Gracelyn? The call was soft, casual. No answer. Gracelyn? A little louder now. Still silence. The seconds stacked on top of one another, forming something heavier than they should have. Emily stepped outside, her pace quickening. She checked behind the fence. The bushes. The small corner near the porch where Gracelyn sometimes played pretend. Nothing. Her heartbeat picked up. Within minutes, Emily was calling her husband. Then the neighbors. Then the authorities. The response was swift. The community mobilized, searching every street, every yard, every open space within walking distance. Voices called out her name, some soft, some desperate. Gracelyn. Nothing. Authorities arrived, mapping out a search radius. They checked nearby homes, questioned anyone who might have seen something. Was she alone? Did anyone see a car? Any unusual activity? No answers. By noon, the panic had set in. The kind of panic that swallows reason. That grips the chest and refuses to let go. It wasn't just Emily anymore. It was the entire town. Small clusters of people combed through streets, looking, hoping, dreading. Every minute felt longer than the last. As the hours stretched, the search became frantic. Voices were louder. Footsteps heavier. Shadows grew longer as the sun inched toward the horizon. Emily kept calling her daughter's name, over and over, until the syllables blurred together. Her voice had started strong, clear, determined, but now, it was hoarse, raw, edged with something too painful to name. Authorities expanded their search radius. Volunteers moved farther, checking creeks, abandoned sheds, drainage ditches, anywhere a child could have wandered, or been taken. Then, at exactly 6 p.m., the call came. "We found her. She was discovered near her home. Less than a mile away. Close enough that, at first, it seemed impossible. How had she been missed? How had an entire town combed the streets only for her to be found so near?" But it wasn't the proximity that made everyone freeze. It was the condition in which she was found. The first officer on scene would later say the moment was surreal. That the air seemed heavier, thicker, as if the world itself had tensed around the discovery. There were no immediate signs of trauma, the official statement read. No evidence indicating foul play at first glance. No arrests were made. No suspects identified. Just silence. Just uncertainty. Just a mother collapsing at the weight of a reality too brutal to bear. Authorities held a press briefing that night, brief, measured, careful. The words were neutral, but their faces weren't. Beneath the professionalism, there was unease. The kind that comes when something isn't adding up. Within hours, speculation spread like wildfire. Some believed it was an accident. Others were certain it wasn't. She was too close to home, people wrote online. Someone must have put her there. She disappeared in broad daylight. No struggle. No witnesses. How does that happen? The questions built upon themselves, stacking higher and higher, until theories blurred into reality. Had she wandered off? Had someone taken her? And if so, why was she returned? In the absence of answers, speculation was the only thing people had. An autopsy was scheduled for the following morning. Officials hoped it would provide clarity, some form of explanation that could make sense of the senseless. The medical examiner was methodical, precise, experienced. But even the most seasoned professionals can struggle with cases like these. The results would take time. Days. Maybe weeks. And until then, the town sat in limbo, caught between grief and mystery, between sorrow and suspicion. In the days following Gracelyn's discovery, the Vick household was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that lingers even when people are in the room. The kind that wraps around grief, settling in like an unwelcome guest. Emily, once full of warmth and light, hardly spoke. She moved through the house as if in slow motion, her body present, but her mind somewhere else, somewhere where Gracelyn still giggled at the breakfast table, still ran through the halls with her mismatched socks, still curled up with Ollie in the living room. Mark, always the steady one, struggled in his own way. His hands clenched when he spoke. His voice grew quieter, heavier. And when he thought no one was looking, he stared at the door, at the very spot where his daughter had last stood before stepping outside. She had vanished in an instant, and now, their home felt like a shell of what it once was. The town, so full of life and routine before, had changed. People whispered in grocery aisles. Parents held their children closer. Neighbors who had once felt safe left their porch lights on all night. At the local school, teachers spoke softly. They glanced at empty desks, wondering if Gracelyn's classmates understood the weight of what had happened. Some did. Others were still too young to grasp the finality of it. There were memorials. Candlelight vigils. Her name was spoken in hushed tones, followed by head shakes and deep sighs. But beneath the grief, something lingered, uncertainty. A collective unease. Because no one really understood what had happened. The questions still hung in the air, unanswered. The official reports left gaps, too many gaps. There were no obvious signs of harm, but there was no clear explanation either. Did she wander off? Was she taken? If so, why was she returned? Theories twisted themselves into knots, each one clashing with the next. Some believed she had gotten lost, confused, disoriented. Others were certain it wasn't that simple, that someone had taken her and, for reasons unknown, placed her back where she could be found. Authorities combed through evidence. They rechecked locations. They reviewed any security footage they could find. But no clear answers emerged. No suspect was identified. No motive was uncovered. It was the kind of mystery that leaves a town unsettled, that lingers in the backs of people's minds long after the news cycle fades. The case sparked conversations far beyond the town's borders. Experts weighed in. Safety specialists issued reminders. The tragedy served as a grim warning, one that echoed in the hearts of parents everywhere. "It's never just another day," one child safety advocate said. "We always assume our neighborhoods are safe, until something happens." Discussions revolved around ways to prevent disappearances. More vigilance. Community awareness. Stricter precautions. But beyond the safety measures, beyond the policies and public service announcements, one truth remained. Gracelyn should have been safe. And yet, she wasn't. There is a certain weight that lingers in the air after tragedy. It doesn't vanish when the headlines fade, when the search teams pack up, when the memorial candles flicker out. It stays, woven into the fabric of a family, embedded in the silence of a home that was once filled with laughter. For the Vicks, life would never return to what it was before. Their mornings would not start with the sound of small footsteps racing down the hall, their evenings would not end with stories and sleepy whispers under a blanket fort. A part of their world had disappeared. And no explanation, no report, no autopsy, no careful arrangement of official statements, could make sense of it. The town, once familiar and predictable, had changed. Gracelyn's absence was felt in places big and small, in the empty swings at the playground, in the quiet corners where she once played, in the way people looked over their shoulders just a little more than before. Some continued searching for answers, combing through possibilities, turning over questions like stones, hoping something, anything, would give them clarity. But answers did not come quickly. And perhaps, for some, they would never come at all. Weeks passed. The investigation pressed forward, but the case remained clouded in uncertainty. Some believed it was a tragic accident. Others were certain there was more to the story, something unseen, something unresolved. Authorities followed leads, ruled out possibilities, sought closure in cold facts. But for the Vicks, for those who had known Gracelyn as more than just a name in a headline, closure was impossible. How does a family heal from something they cannot understand? A family shattered. A community mourning. A case still unfolding. I invite you to share your thoughts, your perspectives, your experiences. What can we learn from this? How can we change the narrative? And if these stories, these slow, immersive explorations into real events, matter to you, I encourage you to subscribe for more. More stories that don't just recount facts, but take you through the moments that shaped them. More voices that question, analyze, reflect. More time to pause. To absorb. To think. The weight of true crime can linger long after a story ends. Some cases haunt us, some leave us unsettled, and some, like this, remind us of the fragility of life. As we come to the end of today's story, take a moment to breathe. To let the tension release. To let the mind settle into the quiet again. The world carries many stories. Some unsettling. Some heartbreaking. Some that leave us searching for answers. But in this moment, there is only stillness. As you settle into rest tonight, let the calm settle over you. Our background sounds will carry you into tranquility as you drift toward sleep. Thank you for being here, and until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.